Hello everyone, I am the Sleepy Joe, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. The first camera I found was in the shower head, the second was nestled in the eye of a teddy bear. By the time I discovered the third hidden behind a vent in the master bedroom, I knew I was in serious trouble. It was supposed to be an easy night of babysitting. The Thompsons had just settled into the grand Victorian mansion at the end of our street when Mrs. Thompson approached me after church last Sunday. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped gently on my shoulder, and I felt a thrill at the prospect of making some extra cash. "We'll only be gone for a few hours," she assured me, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Liam's an angel. He'll be in bed by 8, and you'll have the run of the house." Now, as I stood in the center of their opulent living room, my heart pounded with a mix of excitement and unease. That as I leaned against my ribs, a realization washed over me. How misguided I had been to trust that smile. The house lay in a hushed stillness, broken only by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock nestled in the corner. Liam had drifted off to sleep without a fuss, just as his mother had promised. It was only after I settled into the plush leather couch, ready to immerse myself in my homework, that I noticed something peculiar about the antique mirror hanging on the opposite wall. A tiny red light blinked in the corner of the ornate frame, almost imperceptible. My curiosity piqued. I approached it, my reflection growing closer with each step. With each step, the sense of unease grew stronger. That's when I noticed it. A lens no larger than a pinhead nestled within the glass. A chill coursed through me. A camera. Someone was observing me. Panic began to creep in as I scanned the room, my gaze flitting from one shadowy corner to another. The more I searched, the more I uncovered. A camera tucked away in the bookshelf, another concealed within the light fixture, and one even cleverly hidden in the potted plant by the window. My thoughts raced. Were the Thompsons secretly recording me, or was there an intruder watching from the shadows? Someone who had breached their sanctuary just as I had. I was invited inside. I hurried up the stairs, taking them two at a time, my socks slipping on the polished wood. I needed to check on Liam. His room was dark, illuminated only by the gentle glow of a night light. I crept to his bed, relief washing over me as I saw his small chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. But as I turned to leave, something on his dresser caught my eye. The teddy bear sat innocently among his other stuffed animals, its glassy eyes reflecting the dim light. Yet one eye was different. It glinted unnaturally, and ACI leaned in closer, and my suspicions were confirmed. Another camera. My stomach churned. I had to get out of here, had to call the police. But as I reached for my phone, a wave of horror washed over me. I had left it downstairs on the coffee table. I descended the stairs slowly, each creak of the old wood sending shivers down my spine. The house felt different now, sinister. Every shadow seemed to conceal another lens, another eye watching my every move. As I entered the living room, my gaze immediately fell on my phone. It wasn't where I'd left it. Instead, it sat in the center of the coffee table, held a screen, positioned as if someone had placed it there with intent. I grasped it, my trembling fingers struggling with the passcode. No signal, of course. The Thompson house was infamous for its poor reception. I would have to rely on their landline. As I made my way to the kitchen, where I had noticed a phone mounted on the wall earlier, I suddenly halted in my tracks. The phone was missing, leaving only an empty bracket and a few frayed wires. My heart raced in my chest, for this was not merely surveillance was no longer a concern. Someone was in the house with me, shifting objects and severing my means of communication. I felt ensnared. I dashed to the front door, yanking on the handle, but it was locked. I was certain I hadn't secured it earlier. Panic gripped my throat as I tried the windows, each one firmly shut. A sound from upstairs made me freeze, footsteps, slow and deliberate, creaking across the floorboards. They were coming from Liam's room. I had to reach him, camera or no camera. I couldn't leave that little boy alone with whoever was there. Up there, I grabbed a heavy candlestick from the mantel, its weight reassuring in my grip, and began to climb the stairs. Each step felt like an eternity, the old wood groaning beneath my feet. The footsteps above had stopped, but I could hear something else now, a low murmur like someone talking softly. I reached the landing, pressing myself against the wall. Liam's door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the hallway. I inched closer, straining to hear. That's right, Liam, you're doing so well, just like we practiced. The voice in the stillness of the night. A sense of unease settled over me, chilling my very veins. What was unfolding before my eyes was a mystery wrapped in shadows. I found myself drawn to the narrow gap of the door, where a scene unfolded that sent a shiver down my spine. There sat Liam, cross-legged on his bed, his gaze distant and lost. Before him loomed a figure I had never encountered, a tall, lean man cloaked in darkness. Yet it was the device he held that truly seized my breath, a tablet displaying a series of video feeds. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, each frame revealing a world I thought I knew, now under the watchful eye of a stranger. He was observing, and I was left to wonder what would happen next. Everything I must have made a sound, a gasp or a whimper, because the man's head snapped towards the door. Our eyes met through the narrow opening, and for a moment time stood still. Then he smiled. It was a terrible thing, that smile full of malice and triumph. Ah, he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. Our guest of honor has arrived. Won't you join us? I didn't think. I ran down the stairs through the living room, my feet barely touching the ground. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps thundering, gaining on me with every second. The back door was my last hope. I skidded into the kitchen, my socks sliding on the tile, and lunged for the handle. Turned, thank God it turned. I burst into the backyard, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. The grass was wet with dew, soaking through my socks as I sprinted across the lawn. The high fence loomed before me, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. I reached it, my fingers scrabbling at the rough wood as I tried to pull myself up. Behind me, I heard the back door slam open. He was out of the house. "Run forever," he called, his voice steady and assured. "This is my game, and I know every move." I pulled myself over the fence, landing heavily on the other side, now in the neighbor's yard. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I dashed through unfamiliar gardens, vaulting over low fences and ducking under clotheslines. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I pressed on. I had to get help, had to save Liam. The streets of the neighborhood blurred past me as I ran, houses dark and silent. Why wasn't anyone awake? Why weren't there any cars? It wasn't until as I reached the end of the street, a chilling realization settled over me. Something was terribly amiss. The road simply ceased to exist, giving way to an abyss of empty blackness, as if the very fabric of the world had been severed. I turned, desperation clawing at my heart, searching for another path, but everywhere I looked, the same oppressive darkness loomed, creeping in and consuming the edges of the neighborhood. In the distance, a sound began to grow louder with each passing moment. His footsteps. "You see now, don't you?" His voice echoed around me, a haunting whisper that seemed to come from every shadow. "There's no escape." There never was. I sank to my knees. The damp grass soaked through my jeans, and the darkness closed in around me. I saw him emerge from between two houses, that terrible smile still plastered on his face. "Don't worry," he said, kneeling down beside me. "You're going to be a star." The last thing I saw before the darkness enveloped me was the blinking red light of a camera, recording every moment of my defeat. I jolted awake with a gasp, my heart racing. The familiar surroundings of my bedroom slowly came into focus. It had been a dream, just in the stillness of the night. A vivid dream enveloped me, pulling me into its chilling embrace. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, yearning for a tether to reality. As the screen illuminated, a notification drew my gaze. A new email, sent mere moments ago. With trembling fingers, I opened it, only to find an attachment, a video file. As I pressed play, a chill coursed through me. There I was, sprinting through an endless neighborhood, terror etched across my face. And always behind me, lurking in the shadows, was him. The camera blinked its red light, a silent witness to my newfound nightmare. The first snap of the twig echoed ominously in the stillness, a harbinger of what was to come. Been a deer, the second maybe a raccoon, but the third, followed by hushed voices, told me I wasn't alone in these godforsaken woods, and whatever I'd stumbled upon I wasn't meant to find. I'd set out at dawn, my backpack laden with enough supplies for a 3-day hike through the Adara. The trail was supposed to be easy, a well-marked path that even novice hikers could navigate, but somewhere around noon I'd taken a wrong turn, or maybe the turn I'd taken was right and the map was wrong. Either way, I found in a part of the forest that felt ancient and untamed. I found myself surrounded by trees that stood closely together, their branches weaving overhead to form a canopy so dense that only thin beams of sunlight could break through. The air was thick with the rich aroma of damp earth and the scent of decaying leaves. As time slipped away and the light began to dim, a realization washed over me. I was utterly lost. In that moment, I should have paused, should have made a camp and waited for the dawn. Yet, a creeping panic took hold, urging me onward into the shadows. In the midst of my desperate hope, I wandered through the darkened woods, yearning for a sign of civilization, a ranger station, a road, anything to guide me home. Exhaustion weighed heavily upon me, and fear began to creep in like the shadows around me. Then, through the trees, I caught a glimpse of flickering light. A campfire, I thought, relief washing over me. Perhaps other hikers or a park ranger, someone who could lead me back to safety. With determination, I pushed through the dense thicket, branches clawing at my face and arms, until I stumbled into a small clearing. What I beheld there made me freeze, my heart leaping into my throat. As the night deepened around me, it wasn't a campsite, at least not any kind I had ever encountered. A large military-style tent loomed in the center of the clearing, surrounded by crates stacked haphazardly. Their contents were concealed, yet their purpose was unmistakable. This was no casual camping trip, but rather an operation. I should have left then, should have turned and run as fast and as far as I could. Yet curiosity, that relentless human trait, kept me rooted to the spot. I crept closer, my feet moving of their own accord. The tent flap was partially open, and I could see movement inside. Shadows dancing in the dim light as the shadows danced on the canvas. A low murmur of voices floated through the air. I leaned in, straining to catch their words, but they remained indistinct, muffled by the rustle of leaves and the pounding of my own heart. My gaze was fixated on the tent, so much so that I nearly overlooked the other details. The fresh tire tracks leading into the clearing, too wide for any ATV, and the sophisticated-looking equipment scattered about, decidedly not your standard camping gear. And there, half hidden under a tarp, lay something that sent a chill down my spine. Guns, not hunting rifles, but serious weapons that hinted at a darker purpose. In the stillness of the night, I found myself amidst a scene that felt far too intense for my own good. Military-grade weapons lay scattered, a discovery that hinted at something much darker lurking in the shadows. My thoughts raced, conjuring images of drug runners and arms dealers, each more chilling than the last. Realizing the gravity of my situation, I instinctively began to retreat, careful to retrace my steps in silence. Yet, in my urgency, I overlooked the ground beneath me. A fallen branch snapped underfoot, its sound slicing through the quiet like a thunderclap. Suddenly, the voices from the tent ceased, replaced by the ominous scrape of a chair and the sound of footsteps drawing near. Panic gripped my heart, and I quickly sought refuge behind the nearest tree, hoping to remain unseen in the enveloping darkness. Pressing myself against the rough bark, I checked the perimeter. A gruff voice commanded, "Could be an animal, but I'm not taking any chances." I heard them fan out, their footsteps crunching on the leaf-strewn ground. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure they'd hear it. I tried to control my breathing, making myself as small and quiet as possible. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping back and forth. They had flashlights. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying they wouldn't come my way. "Nothing over here, boss," a voice called out too close for comfort. I kept my gaze fixed on the shadows. The gruff voice responded, "If it's a ranger, we need to know." I opened my eyes just a crack, trying to gauge how many figures lurked in the gloom. Through the darkness, I could make out at least 3 silhouettes moving among the trees, perhaps more. Back at the camp, there were too many for me to outrun or overpower. A plan was essential. I couldn't remain hidden forever, and sooner or later, they would find me. I looked around, frantically searching for an escape route, but the forest seemed to close in around me, every direction looking more daunting than the last. In the stillness of the night, I found myself in a shadowy realm, equally dark and foreboding. That's when I noticed it. A small gap nestled between 2 imposing boulders, partially concealed by a fallen log. It was a tight squeeze, but perhaps just wide enough for me to slip through. If fortune favored me, it might lead to an escape. I held my breath, waiting for the nearest searcher to turn his back. Then, with a quiet resolve, I crouched low and scurried across the open ground, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I reached the boulders, a shout pierced the silence. "Hey, over there!" I didn't dare look back. Instead, I dove for the gap, ignoring the sharp rocks that lay in my path. Scraped my sides. It was a tighter fit than I'd thought, and for one terrifying moment I thought I was stuck, but with a final desperate wriggle I slipped through. I found myself in a narrow ravine, the walls rising steep and high on either side. Without pausing to catch my breath, I started to run, stumbling over loose rocks and exposed roots behind me. I could hear shouting and the beam of flashlights. They knew where I'd gone, and they were coming after me. The ravine twisted and turned, and I followed it blindly, praying it wouldn't lead to a dead end. My lungs burned and my legs felt heavy, yet I pressed on, unwilling to slow down. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, or perhaps it was merely my imagination, heightened by fear and fatigue. Just when I thought I could go no further, the ravine opened up before me. I emerged onto a wider, clearly man-made trail, a hiking path. In the distance, lights flickered, perhaps from a ranger station or a campground, a beacon of safety. I raced toward the lights, my feet pounding against the packed earth, while frustrated shouts echoed ominously behind me. As I approached the lights, I found myself at a ranger station, where a solitary figure stood outside, gazing into the enveloping darkness. With each step closer, I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. "Help!" I gasped, stumbling the final yards. "Please, you have to help me." The ranger, a middle-aged woman with a gentle demeanor, caught me just as I was about to collapse. "Easy there," she said, her voice steady yet alert. "What's happened? Are you hurt?" Between my labored breaths, I struggled to convey the horrors I had witnessed. The camp, the weapons, the men pursuing me. The ranger listened intently, her calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos I had escaped. Her expression turned serious as she listened. "Let's get you inside," she said, guiding me toward the station. "I need to call this in." As we stepped into the warm, brightly lit building, I felt the adrenaline begin to ebb, replaced by a deep-seated weariness. The ranger sat me down, handed me a bottle of water, and went to make her call. I sipped the water slowly, my mind still spinning from everything that had transpired. Part of me struggled to accept that it was real, yet the scratches on my arms, the mud on my clothes, and the lingering fear in my gut told a different story. As the ranger returned, her expression was grave. "I've alerted the authorities," she said, her voice steady. "They're sending a team out now, but it will take some time for them to arrive. In the meantime, I need you to share every detail you observed, no matter how insignificant it may seem." I nodded, inhaling deeply, and began to weave my tale. An unsettling sensation lingered within me, whispering that this was merely the beginning. Whatever I had encountered in those woods felt vast, overshadowing both myself and this isolated ranger station. As the night deepened, the ranger diligently took notes, the clock steadily ticking towards dawn. A sense of unease settled within me, casting doubt on whether I would ever feel safe in the wilderness again. The forest, once a sanctuary of solace and adventure, now loomed with shadows that haunted my thoughts. Yet, as I concluded my story and met the ranger's determined gaze, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Whatever lurked in the darkness, whatever unsettling truths I had unearthed, would not remain concealed for long. Perhaps, just perhaps, my ill-fated hike would lead to something good after all. As the first light of dawn began to break, peek through the windows, I heard the distant sound of helicopters approaching. Help was coming, and with it the promise of answers to the mysteries hidden in the depths of the forest. The lock clicked shut with a finality that made my skin crawl. I yanked at the door handle once, twice, 3 times, but it wouldn't budge. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. We were trapped, and whoever had locked us in was still out there. It was supposed to be a quick overnight stay, just a place to rest our heads before, as we continued our cross-country road trip, Ava and I found ourselves driving for hours, our eyes growing heavy with exhaustion. Suddenly, we spotted the flickering neon vacancy sign of the Pine Grove Motel cutting through the darkness. The place appeared to have seen better days, with paint peeling from the wooden siding and weeds pushing through the cracks in the parking lot. Yet, it was cheap, and we were too weary to concern ourselves with aesthetics. The night clerk, a wiry man with thinning hair and nicotine-stained fingers, barely glanced up from his dog-eared paperback as he handed us the keys. "The key to room 13, he mumbled, his voice as worn as the motel itself. Our room was small and musty, adorned with faded floral wallpaper and a sagging queen-sized bed. Yet, it offered a shower with hot water and clean towels, a touch of luxury after hours spent on the road. "It's just for one night," Ava said, attempting to sound optimistic as she tested the lumpy mattress. "We'll be back on the road before we know it." If only we had known then how wrong she was. The trouble began around 2 a.m. I was stirred from my slumber by a sound that eluded my understanding. A scraping metallic noise that seemed to drift in from just beyond our door. At first, I wondered if I was still caught in the remnants of a dream, the shadows of a nightmare lingering in my mind. But then it came again, louder this time, accompanied by hushed whispers. I gently nudged Ava awake, placing a finger to my lips to signal her to remain silent. She blinked at me, confusion etched on her face, then stilled as the noises outside became clearer. Someone was indeed out there, and they were attempting to gain entry. We hurriedly climbed out of bed, our hearts racing in a synchronized rhythm. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, hoping to call for help, but my heart sank as the no-service message glared back at me. "Try the landline," Ava whispered, her voice quivering. I picked up the old-fashioned phone resting on the bedside table and held it to my ear, but there was nothing. No dial tone, just silence. We were cut off. The scraping at the door grew louder, accompanied by muffled curses. Whoever was out there was becoming increasingly frustrated. I scanned the room in a panic, searching for something, anything that could serve as a weapon. The lamp felt too heavy, and the TV, well, it offered no comfort in this moment. My gaze was fixed on the shower curtain rod, firmly attached to the wall. It wasn't much, but it offered a glimmer of hope. Just as I managed to wrench it free, a new sound pierced the stillness, the unmistakable click of a key turning in the lock. Our eyes met in the dim light, a silent understanding passing between us. This was it. We had to be ready. The door creaked open, and 2 figures stepped into the room. In the shadows, I caught a glimpse of something metallic glinting in one of their hands. A crowbar or perhaps a tire iron. Without a moment's hesitation, I swung the curtain rod with all my might. That as I moved, there was a satisfying thud as it connected with something solid, followed by a grunt of pain. Ava screamed, more out of surprise than fear, I think, and lunged for the open door. I was right behind her, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete of the walkway as we ran. The night air was crisp and biting, a stark contrast to the stuffy warmth of our room. We sprinted across the parking lot, the gravel digging into our soles, heading for our car. Safety was just a few yards away, but as we reached the vehicle, my heart sank. The tires were flat, all four of them slashed open. We were going nowhere. The office, Ava gasped, already turning towards the flickering neon sign at the far end of the lot. Maybe the clerk can help. We ran, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind us. I chanced a glance over my shoulder and saw three men, now their faces hidden in shadow, but their intent clear. In the purposeful way they moved, we burst into the office. The bell over the door jingling cheerfully, incongruous with our panic. The night clerk looked up, startled. His paperback tumbled to the floor. "Hey, please," I panted. "You have to help us. There are men chasing us. They broke into our room." But as I spoke, I noticed the clerk's expression shift. Not to one of concern or alarm, but to something else, something that sent a chill through my veins. A slow, knowing smile unfurled across his face. Now, he said, his voice no longer bored but sharp with anticipation. "What seems to be the problem here?" The door behind us creaked open, the cheerful bell now sounding like a death knell. I turned to. As I glanced back, the figures of our pursuers emerged, filling the doorway and casting long shadows in the harsh fluorescent light of the office. Their faces came into focus, and I noticed one of them, the largest, had a fresh bruise on his temple, a reminder of our earlier encounter with the curtain rod. "Looks like we've got some runners, boys," the clerk remarked, stepping out from behind the counter, a syringe filled with clear liquid clutched in his hand. "You know how I hate it when they run." Ava's grip tightened around my arm, her nails pressing into my skin as she whispered, "What do you want from us?" demanded, her voice stronger than I would have thought possible given the circumstances. The clerk chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Wano, sweetheart, it's not about what we want, it's about what others are willing to pay for. And let me tell you, pretty young things like you two, you'll fetch a very nice price." Indeed, the reality of our situation hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just a robbery, this was something far worse. We were merchandise to these men, nothing more than product to be sold to the highest bidder. I felt Ava tense beside me, and I knew without looking what she was about to do. In that moment, we were perfectly in sync, our thoughts aligned by sheer desperation. We moved as one, charging towards the nearest man. The element of surprise was on our side, and we managed to knock him off balance. Ava's elbow connected with his solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs, while I aimed a kick at his knee. There was a sickening pop, and he went down with a howl of pain. We were through the door before the sun might feel the cool night air as a harsh reminder of our predicament. But we had little choice. Our car lay useless, and we found ourselves in the heart of nowhere, surrounded by the woods. Ava gasped, her instincts guiding her toward the tree line that framed the motel property. "We can lose them in there," she urged, and without hesitation, I followed her into the enveloping darkness of the forest. Behind us, shouts echoed, and beams of flashlights sliced through the night, illuminating the path they took. They were coming for us, and their familiarity with these woods was a chilling thought. We ran, hearts pounding in the silence of the trees. Branches lashed at us like restless spirits, and the underbrush clawed at our legs. Each sound, a twig snapping, leaves rustling, sent a shiver of adrenaline coursing through me. Were they closing in? How much longer could we endure this? Just as I felt my lungs might give way, Ava halted us with a whisper, her breath uneven. At first, all I could perceive was the frantic thump of my heart. But then, like a beacon in the dark, I caught the distant rumble of traffic, a sign of civilization, a glimmer of hope. We pressed on, our pace easing into a weary jog. The weight of exhaustion settled upon us. The sounds of pursuit began to fade into the night. Yet, uncertainty lingered. Had we truly evaded them, or were they merely treading more carefully in their search? After what seemed like an eternity, though it was likely only 20 minutes, we finally emerged from the dense tree line. Before us lay a two-lane highway, a ribbon of hope stretching into the darkness. In the distance, the headlights of an approaching truck pierced the gloom. We waved our arms frantically, perhaps appearing like wild figures to the driver, But thankful and relieved, the truck began to slow as we climbed into the cab. The kind-faced trucker peered at us with concern, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a genuine sense of relief. We were safe, we had escaped. Yet, as the truck pulled away, carrying us toward the nearest town and the promise of help, I couldn't shake the memory of the clerk's words. How many others had fallen victim to their scheme? How long had they been operating, turning their remote motel into a hunting ground for unsuspecting travelers? I glanced at Ava that I saw the same resolve in her eyes that echoed in my heart. This wasn't over. We had escaped, yes, but now we bore the weighty responsibility to report what had transpired, to ensure those men were stopped. Our road trip had taken an unexpected detour, and as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, I realized our journey was far from over. It had only just begun. The moment I handed him my keys, a sense of dread washed over me. His fingers closed around them, a triumphant glint in his eyes sending a chill down my spine. But by then, it was too late. We found ourselves on a road that felt unfamiliar. The man beside me, who I had believed to be merely an interested buyer, had transformed into something much darker. It all began so innocently. I was just a broke college student trying to sell my old Honda Civic to help with this semester's tuition. Every dollar was precious, and I thought I could fetch a fair price. I crafted an ad online, complete with some decent photos, and then I waited. When David reached out, he appeared to be the ideal buyer, asking all the right questions about the car's history and maintenance. That he was polite in his messages. And when we spoke on the phone, his friendly, easygoing manner put me at ease. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop near campus for him to see the car and perhaps take it for a test drive. I remember thinking how normal he looked when I first saw him. Mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing a polo shirt and jeans. He could have been anyone's dad or a friendly neighbor. We chatted over coffee, and he seemed genuinely interested in my studies. Looking back, I should have noticed how he steered the conversation. He inquired about my family, my origins, and whether I had any roommates. At that moment, it felt like nothing more than pleasant small talk. Once we reached the car, he conducted a meticulous inspection, peering under the hood and examining the tires. Everything appeared to be in order. "Mind if we take it for a spin?" he asked, a smile lighting up his face. I nodded, settling into the passenger seat. It wasn't until we had been driving for about 15 minutes that I began to notice we were venturing out of town. Where are we going?" I asked as I spoke. I kept my voice light, though a sense of unease began to settle in. David's smile remained steady, yet there was a shift in his eyes that caught my attention. "I know a great stretch of road to really test the engine. It won't take long," he said. I swallowed hard, feeling my mouth go dry. "Actually, I'd rather we head back now. I have a class in an hour." He didn't reply, just continued driving. The buildings thinned out, giving way to open fields and patches of woodland. My heart started to race as the reality of our isolation dawned on me. "David, seriously, turn around now," I urged, my voice tinged with urgency as I attempted to steady my voice. Aiming for a tone of authority, it instead emerged as a tremor. In that moment, the facade he wore slipped away, his warmth replaced by a chilling gaze that pierced through the dim light. "Shut up and sit still if you know what's good for you," he commanded, and a wave of dread washed over me, icy fingers clutching at my heart. This was surreal. Surely such things were confined to the realm of nightmares. Yet, the widening gap between us and the familiar world confirmed the unsettling truth of my situation. My eyes darted to the door, contemplating an escape, but the speed at which we traveled rendered that thought futile. Even if I were to leap, survival seemed a distant hope. Where would I go? There was nothing but empty fields for miles. "Don't even think about it," David growled, as if reading my mind. "One wrong move and things will get very unpleasant for you." I believed him. The menace in his voice left no room for doubt. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. My phone was in my pocket, but I knew I'd never be able to call for help without him noticing. Maybe if I could just send a quick text, slowly, trying not to Draw attention, I slipped my hand into my pocket, but before I could even touch my phone, David's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist in a vice-likey grip. Nice try, he snarled, wrenching my arm so hard I cried out in pain. Hand it over now. With trembling fingers, I pulled out my phone and placed it in his outstretched hand. He immediately rolled down the window and tossed it out, the device disappearing into the blur of the passing landscape. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I was truly cut off now, with no way to call for help. Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back furiously. I couldn't fall apart now. We had to remain vigilant, searching for any chance to break free. The journey stretched on, hours blending into one another, the landscape a monotonous blur. David sat in silence, his gaze unwavering on the path ahead. I attempted to etch every twist and landmark into my memory, but it was futile. Everything appeared indistinguishable. At last, we veered onto a narrow dirt road, little more than a trail winding through a thick forest. The car jolted and bounced over the rugged terrain, branches scraping against the windows. After a few moments, we broke into a clearing, revealing a crumbling structure. The cabin stood silently as David parked the car and turned to me, his expression a mystery. "We're here," he said, urging me to get out. My legs felt like jelly as I stepped into the thick air, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. In another time, it might have felt serene, but now it wrapped around me like a shroud, isolating and oppressive. David's presence loomed behind me, something hard pressed against my back, a reminder of the gravity of the moment. I didn't need to glance back to know it was a gun. Inside, the cabin matched its exterior, worn and weary, a layer of dust blanketing everything, as if time itself had forgotten this place. Everything around me was steeped in a musty smell, a scent that spoke of long abandonment. A rickety table stood in the center, accompanied by a couple of chairs and an old mattress tucked away in the corner. Nothing else stirred in the dim light. "Sit," David said, gesturing to one of the chairs. As I sank into it, he pulled out a length of rope from a duffel bag I hadn't noticed before. My stomach churned as he began to tie my hands behind my back, the rough fibers biting into my skin. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, hating how small and scared my voice sounded. David paused in his work, considering me for a moment. "It's nothing," he replied, his tone unsettlingly calmed. "I in a world where shadows loom and whispers carry weight." A chilling realization settled in. The words spoken were laced with a sinister undertone, a reminder of the dark tales that often danced at the edges of my mind. The implications were clear, and a wave of nausea washed over me, as if the very air had turned heavy with dread. "Please," I pleaded, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and desperation. "You don't have to do this. I won't tell anyone, I swear. Just let me go." His laughter echoed in the dimness, a sound devoid of warmth, sending a shiver down my spine. "Save your breath," he replied, his tone cold and unyielding. "You're not the first to make that promise." In the dim light of the room, a sense of dread hung in the air. He approached, his intentions clear, as he secured my hands, rendering me vulnerable. I felt the cold grip of fear, but deep within, a flicker of defiance ignited. As he knelt before me, I summoned every ounce of strength I could muster. With a swift motion, I kicked out, my foot meeting his face with a force that echoed in the silence. He stumbled back, shock etched across his features. Seizing the moment, I threw myself sideways, the chair crashing down with me, sending a jolt of pain through my body. Yet my spirit remained unbroken. My shoulder, but I ignored it, focusing on wriggling my hands free. I heard David cursing, scrambling to his feet. The ropes were looser than I'd thought. He must have been overconfident, not expecting me to fight back. With a final desperate tug, my hands came free. I untangled myself from the fallen chair. Just as David lunged for me, I rolled away narrowly. Avoiding his grasp, my eyes darted around the cabin, looking for a weapon, an escape route, anything there. The window, it was small, but so was I. I sprinted for it. With a rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins, I discovered a speed I never knew I had. Behind me, David's furious roar echoed, and I felt his fingers graze my shirt as he reached for me. But I was quicker. I hurled myself toward the window, shielding my face as the glass shattered around me. Pain shot through me as shards sliced into my skin, yet I pressed on. I hit the ground running, racing toward the shelter of the trees. David's shouts reverberated behind me, but I dared not glance back. I ran with a fervor I had never known, branches whipping against my face, roots threatening to trip me as I fled into the darkness. That tripped me with every step, but I kept going, driven by pure survival instinct. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that green maze, but eventually the shouts faded, replaced by the normal sounds of the forest. Still, I didn't slow down. I couldn't risk it. It was nearly dark when I finally broke through the tree line and found myself on a road, a real paved road. Hope surged through me, giving me a second wind. I started walking, my feet aching, my body screaming for rest, but I couldn't stop. Not yet had the headlights appeared in the distance, but they weren't growing brighter as they approached. I waved my arms frantically, praying it wasn't David, hoping they would stop. The car slowed and then pulled over. An elderly couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, taking in my disheveled appearance, the cuts and bruises. I shook my head, tears finally spilling over. "No," I choked out. "I need help, please." They ushered me into their car, promising to take me to the police. The reality of what I had escaped began to settle in. I was alive, I was free, yet the nightmare lingered. David was still out there, and who could say how many others like him roamed the shadows? As we drove towards safety, a silent vow formed within me. I would do whatever it took to ensure he was caught, to protect others from falling prey to his schemes. My ordeal might have reached its end, but my fight was only just beginning. The first drop of blood on the kitchen floor should have been my cue to flee, yet I found myself frozen, watching as the old man's kindly smile twisted into something far more sinister. In that moment, a sense of unease washed over me as I understood that I had not found refuge from the tempest. Instead, I had unwittingly stepped into a place fraught with danger. What began as a simple road trip, a means to clear my mind after a tumultuous breakup, had taken a dark turn. Just me and the open road. I had been driving for hours, the rain hammering against my windshield with relentless intensity. Then, my old Chevy began to emit a sound that sent a chill creeping down my spine. A rattling, sputtering noise that hinted at impending trouble. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, miles away from the last town I had passed as the car finally surrendered to its fate. It shuddered once, twice, and then fell silent, leaving me alone on a desolate stretch of country road. I paused for a moment, listening to the rain tap gently on the roof, contemplating my choices. My cell phone displayed a disheartening lack of signal, and it had been an hour since I last spotted another vehicle. With a resigned sigh, I donned my raincoat and stepped into the relentless downpour. That's when I noticed it, a faint glimmer in the distance, barely discernible through the sheets of rain. A farmhouse nestled back from the road. The road stretched before me, a path of salvation as I trudged through the thick mud, my shoes making soft squelching sounds with each step. As I drew nearer, the details of the house began to emerge. It was an old structure, its white paint peeling in places, yet it bore an air of careful maintenance. Flower pots adorned the porch, and a warm light spilled invitingly from the windows. I paused at the bottom of the porch steps, the hour late, well past 11:00 p.m. according to my watch. I wondered if they would even be awake, but desperation triumphed over politeness. I climbed the steps, raising my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. An elderly man stood there, his face creased with smile lines, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "Well, hello there," he said, his voice as inviting as his smile. "Looks like you got caught in quite a storm. Come in, come in." Relief washed over me as I stepped inside, out of the rain. The house was cozy, filled with the kind of knickknacks and worn treasures that whispered stories of their own. Furniture that whispered tales of a long, well-lived life surrounded us. "I'm so sorry to bother you," I began, but he waved off my apologies with a gentle hand. "Nonsense, we can't have you standing out there in this weather." "I'm Jackson," he said, gesturing to an equally elderly woman who had appeared in the doorway, likely from the kitchen. "And that's my wife, Abigail." "I'm Ethan," I replied, still dripping on their welcome mat. "My car broke down about a mile back. I was hoping I could use your phone to call for a tow." Abigail clucked her tongue sympathetically. "Oh dear, that's no good. But I'm afraid our phone line's been down since this afternoon. The storm, you know." My heart sank. "Oh, I see now." "Don't you worry," Jackson said, patting my shoulder. "You're welcome to stay here tonight. The storm should pass by morning, and we can figure things out then. Abigail, why don't you get our guests some dry clothes while I make some tea?" Before I knew it, I was seated at their kitchen table, wrapped in a borrowed robe that smelled faintly of mothballs. My hands curled around a steaming mug of tea as Abigail fussed over me as I sat there, Jackson weaving tales of the farm's history. I found myself insisting on eating something. It was a comforting moment, a rare feeling of being cared for since my breakup. Yet, as the night deepened, subtle unease began to creep in. I noticed Abigail's smile faltering when she thought I wasn't watching, and Jackson's gaze seemed to avoid mine, lingering just out of reach. There was an elusive sensation, something unsettling that I couldn't quite identify. It wasn't until I rose to use the bathroom that I truly sensed it. There was a faint coppery smell lurking beneath the comforting aromas of baked goods and polished furniture. I attempted to dismiss it, yet it lingered at the back of my throat, stirring a sense of unease. When I returned to the kitchen, I found Jackson alone, washing dishes at the sink. "Abigail's gone to prepare the guest room for you," he said, glancing over his shoulder. I nodded and moved to retrieve my mug from the table. That's when I noticed it, a single drop of red on the faded linoleum floor. I stared, my mind struggling to comprehend the sight before me. Jackson must have sensed my stillness, for he turned his attention toward me. Eyes followed my gaze to the floor for a moment, and neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he set down the dish he was holding and turned to face me fully. "Ah," he said, his voice no longer warm and grandfatherly. "I was hoping you wouldn't notice." I looked up at him, my heart beginning to race. The kindly old man was gone, replaced by someone else, someone whose eyes were cold and calculating. "What's going on?" I asked, hating how my voice shook. Jackson sighed, reaching for something behind him. "It's nothing personal, you understand. It's... Well, you see, Abigail and I have our own peculiar needs, and visitors are a rare occurrence in this quiet place." As he brought his hand into view, a chill crept through me. He was gripping a large kitchen knife, its blade shimmering ominously under the overhead light. I instinctively backed away, my eyes scanning for an escape route. "You don't have to do this," I managed to say, striving to keep my voice steady. "I'll leave right now. I won't tell anyone, I swear." Jackson's chuckle echoed in the stillness, a sound stripped of any warmth. "Oh, I'm afraid it's far too late for that, Ethan. You see, we've already..." "It was a decision made, one that would see you helping us regardless of your wishes." I made a dash for the front door, my heart racing, but Jackson, despite his years, was surprisingly quick. He seized my arm, his bony fingers gripping me with an unexpected force. "Abigail," he called, "our guest is trying to leave." The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairs, and soon Abigail emerged, a syringe glinting ominously in her hand. A chill of dread washed over me as I recognized it for what it was. Now," she cooed, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness. "There's no need for all this fuss. Just a little prick and you'll feel much better." I fought with everything I had, kicking and scratching, screaming into the night, but they were stronger than they appeared. Jackson held me down while Abigail approached with the syringe. In my desperation, I lashed out blindly, my elbow connecting with something soft, Abigail's stomach, I realized. She stumbled back with a cry of pain, and the syringe clattered to the floor. Seizing the moment of Jackson's distraction, I wrenched myself free and ran for the kitchen, my mind racing through the shadows of the night. There had to be a back door. I found it, fumbling with the lock as Jackson's angry shouts echoed behind me. At last, the door gave way, and I burst into the rain-soaked night. The yard was muddy, my bare feet slipping and sliding as I ran. I could hear them behind me, their voices carried on the wind. I headed for the barn, hoping to hide there, perhaps find a weapon. The barn door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound seeming impossibly loud in the stillness of the night. Inside, it was pitch black. I felt my way forward, my hands outstretched as I moved cautiously through the darkness. A sudden jolt sent me tumbling to the ground. My foot had struck something solid, and I landed in a wet, sticky substance. The familiar coppery scent enveloped me, and I fought to suppress a scream as the realization washed over me. Blood, an overwhelming amount of it. My eyes began to adjust to the dim light, revealing unsettling shapes that loomed in the shadows. Hooks, tables with ominous straps, and something far more sinister that resembled body parts. This was no mere act of violence. It was a scene of butchery. I scrambled to my feet, nausea rising within me, and my throat tightened as the urgency to escape surged within me. I had to run, to seek help, but as I turned to flee, the doorway loomed before me, obstructed. Jackson and Abigail stood there, their figures dark against the moonlit sky. "Oh, Ethan," Abigail's voice dripped with a feigned sympathy. "You really shouldn't have come in here. Now we have no choice." I retreated, my gaze scanning for anything, a weapon, a way out. My fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. A pitchfork rested against the wall. "Stay back," I warned, raising it defensively. Jackson's laughter echoed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Or what?" He taunted. "Kill us, go ahead, it won't be the first time someone's tried." They advanced slowly, confidently. They knew they had me cornered, but they had underestimated my will to survive. As they got closer, I made my move. I charged forward, the pitchfork held out in front of me like a lance. Jackson's eyes widened in surprise, but it was too late. The time sank into his chest with a sickening thud. Abigail screamed a sound of pure rage and grief. She came at me with her bare hands, her nails raking across my face. We grappled as I rolled on the blood-soaked floor of the barn. My hand closed around something hard, a hammer that had fallen from a workbench. I swung it blindly, feeling it connect with a dull thud, and in that moment, Abigail went limp. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath, the reality of what had just transpired washing over me like a cold wave. Slowly, I got to my feet. The rain had stopped, and in the distance, a sound made my heart leap: sirens. As I stumbled out of the barn, I saw police cars pulling up to the farmhouse, their lights painting the night in a frantic dance. Night in red and blue. Someone must have heard the commotion, called for help. I sank to my knees in the muddy yard, relief and shock washing over me in equal measure. It was over, I was safe. But as the police swarmed around me asking questions I couldn't begin to answer, I knew that the nightmare was far from over. The things I'd seen in that barn, the horrors I'd experienced, they would stay with me forever. I had survived, yes, but at what cost? The safe wasn't supposed to be open. That was my first clue that this seemingly cushy house-sitting gig was about to turn into a nightmare. As I stared at the stack of unmarked bills and the suspicious ledger, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the front door lock. In that moment, I knew I was in way over my head. It had all started innocently enough. I was a broke college student desperate for some extra cash to cover my textbooks and maybe splurge on something other than ramen noodles for once. When my professor, Dr. Winters, I mentioned he and his wife needed someone to houses. As I settled in for the week while they attended a conference, I couldn't help but feel a thrill at the opportunity. The Winters lived in one of those grand houses in the suburbs, complete with manicured lawns and spacious 3-car garages. It was a stark contrast to my small studio apartment. Upon my arrival, Mrs. Winters welcomed me with a whirlwind tour, highlighting the plants that required watering and the intricate security system I was to activate each night. She paused at the door to the study, her expression turning serious. "This room is strictly off limits," she said. "Private papers and all that. I'm sure you understand." It was a curious situation, one that unfolded quietly. I found myself nodding in understanding, not giving it much thought. After all, rich people have their secrets. The initial days passed in a serene manner. I lounged by the pool, indulged in their well-stocked fridge, and lost myself in shows on their grand television. Felt like a vacation in paradise. Yet, on the fourth day, a whisper of curiosity began to stir within me. I had always possessed a bit of nosiness, a trait that had drawn me to journalism. The locked study door had been a persistent thought, and I felt an irresistible urge to take a peek. I reassured myself that I was merely ensuring that all was well within. Perhaps a plant had slipped my mind, a flimsy excuse indeed, yet it was sufficient to coax me toward the door handle. To my astonishment, it yielded easily. The study lay before me, immaculate in its dark wood and leather-bound tomes, resembling a scene plucked from a film. Yet, my gaze was drawn to the painting on the far wall, slightly askew, revealing the edge of a safe behind it. I must admit, my next action was not one I take pride in, but as I mentioned, curiosity has always been my Achilles heel. I stepped closer to the with my heart pounding. I reassured myself that I would only look, not touch. But as I moved the painting aside, I froze. The safe was ajar, just enough for me to glimpse inside. That's when I heard the front door creak open. Panic surged within me as I quickly closed the safe and straightened the painting, my hands trembling. Footsteps echoed through the house, drawing nearer. "Hello?" A male voice called out, and it wasn't Dr. Winters. I glanced around, my mind racing for a hiding spot. The closet seemed too obvious, and I knew I wouldn't make it in time. In a moment of desperation, I found myself diving beneath the sturdy oak desk, pulling the chair in tight to hide my presence. The study door creaked open, revealing a pair of polished shoes that glinted in the dim light. "All clear in here," the man said, likely speaking into a phone. "Yeah, the safe's untouched. Looks like the kid didn't snoop after all." Kid? Were they referring to me? Just then, another set of footsteps echoed in the room. A woman's voice followed, cool and collected. "Good. Last thing we need is some nosy college brat messing up our operation." A chill ran through me at the mention of operation. What had I unwittingly stumbled into? Into "let's get what we need and get out." The man said the Winters will be back tomorrow, and we need to have everything in place by then. I held my breath as they moved around the room. I heard the safe open, papers rustling, and the distinct sound of money being counted. "Perfect," the woman said. "With this last shipment, we'll have enough to expand into 3 more states. The boss will be pleased." Shipment states. My mind was reeling. This sounded big, way bigger than some run-of-the-mill theft or fraud. "What about the girl Theus?" the man inquired if she suspected anything. A moment of silence lingered, filled with uncertainty. The woman eventually responded, reflecting on the Winters' words, suggesting that the girl was merely a naive student, likely having spent her entire week by the pool. If only they knew. Their conversation drifted through names and places that felt foreign to me, yet I strained to commit them to memory, my instincts as a journalist stirring within me, despite the unease that gripped my heart. Time seemed to stretch, though it was likely just a few fleeting minutes, before they finally departed from the study. I held my breath, waiting in the stillness, until the sound of the front door echoed through the silence. As the night deepened, the sound of a car engine starting outside broke the stillness. Slowly, I emerged from my hiding place beneath the desk, my legs feeling cramped and unsteady. My thoughts raced, a whirlwind of possibilities. Should I call the police? But what if the Winters were involved? They could return at any moment, and I had no proof of what I had overheard. Evidence was essential. With trembling hands, I approached the safe once more. It remained slightly ajar. Inside, I discovered stacks of cash, the ledger I had glimpsed earlier, and a USB drive. Without pausing to consider the potential consequences, I seized the USB drive and tucked it into my pocket, I quickly snapped a photo of the open safe with my phone, capturing the cash and ledger. A sudden noise caught my attention. Just as I was closing the safe and adjusting the painting, I heard the unmistakable sound of another car pulling up outside. Panic washed over me once more. I dashed out of the study, barely remembering to close the door behind me. I reached the living room just as the front door swung open, revealing Dr. and Mrs. Winters. They looked tired yet content. "Oh, Olivia," Mrs. Winters exclaimed. "We didn't expect you to still be here. How was everything?" I forced a smile, hoping my expression concealed the turmoil within. Betray the turmoil inside me. "Great," I managed to say. "No problems at all. How was your conference?" As they chatted about their trip, I nodded along, my mind elsewhere. The USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. "Well, we won't keep you," Dr. Winters said finally. "I'm sure you're eager to get back to your own place. Here's a little something extra for your trouble." He handed me an envelope. I thanked him, feeling sick to my stomach. Was this hush money? Did they know I'd overheard something? I gathered my things and headed for the door, my legs feeling like jelly. "Oh, and Olivia," Mrs. Winters called after me, "we might need a house sitter again next month. Would you be interested?" I turned, meeting her gaze. Her smile seemed genuine, but there was something in her eyes, a calculating look that I hadn't noticed before. "Sure," I heard myself say. "Just let me know." As I drove home, my mind was in chaos. What had I gotten myself into? I had evidence of something, but what exactly, and what was I supposed to do with it? I thought about going to the police, but without knowing who was involved, felt too risky. What if the corruption went higher than I could imagine? When I returned to my apartment, I locked the door and drew the curtains. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I powered up my laptop with trembling hands and inserted the USB drive. What I found made my blood run cold. Financial records, shipping manifests, names and addresses. It was all there. This wasn't just some small-time operation. This was organized crime on a massive scale, and my professors, the kindly Dr. and Mrs. Winters, were right. In the stillness of the night, I found myself immersed in a sea of files, the clock ticking softly as I took notes, piecing together the fragments of a daunting puzzle. By morning's light, a choice loomed before me: to share my findings with the authorities and trust in their judgment, to bury the memories and pretend none of it had ever crossed my path, or to delve deeper, wielding my journalistic instincts to unveil the entire tale. As the sun began to rise, casting a gentle glow through my curtains, I felt a stirring within me. This was a story too significant to abandon. With resolve, I opened my laptop and set to work. In the quiet suburbs, where the lawns are perfectly manicured and smiles seem genuine, there lies a world of hidden darkness. It only takes one inquisitive house sitter to unearth the secrets that linger just beneath the surface. I found myself on a path I could not have anticipated, one that held dangers I had yet to comprehend. Yet, amidst the uncertainty, one truth stood clear: my life was about to change forever. What began as a simple house-sitting job quickly evolved into the most significant story of my existence, and I was resolute in my pursuit, regardless of the consequences. But the moment her hand brushed against my arm, a chilling realization washed over me. I had made a grave error. Fingers were ice cold, her grip unnaturally strong. As I looked into her eyes, pleading for help, I saw nothing but emptiness, and that's when I realized this wasn't a stranded motorist, this was a trap. I'd been driving for hours, the monotony of the rural highway broken only by the occasional flicker of my headlights catching a road sign or the eyes of some nocturnal creature. It was past midnight, and I was on my last delivery run of the night as a driver for a small courier company. These late-night routes were part of the job. Usually they were uneventful, perhaps even boring, but tonight was different. I first spotted her about a mile back, a solitary figure on the side of the road, arm outstretched in the universal sign for a hitchhiker. At first, I drove past. Company policy strictly forbade picking up strangers. Yet something compelled me to slow down. As I glanced in my rearview mirror, I noticed her vulnerability, standing there in the dark. She appeared young, maybe in her early 20s, with long dark hair whipping around her face in the wind. I could see she was shivering, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Against my better judgment, I found myself pulling over as I put the van in park and rolled down the passenger window. I called out, "You okay? Need some help?" She approached slowly, relief evident on her face. "Oh, thank God," she said, her voice trembling. "My car broke down a few miles back, and I've been walking for hours. Could you please give me a ride to the next town?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to drive away, but it was cold out, and the next town was at least 20 miles away. What kind of person would I be if I left her here? "All right," I said, unlocking the door. "Doors hop in, I can take you as far as Cedarville." Her smile was grateful as she climbed into the passenger seat. "Thank you so much. You're a lifesaver." We drove in silence for a few minutes, and I could feel her shivering next to me, so I turned up the heat. "I'm Ryan, by the way," I said, trying to break the ice. "Ava," she replied, offering a small smile. As we talked, I found myself relaxing. Ava was easy to chat with, and I felt good about helping her out. But as we drove deeper into the night, things started to feel off. I noticed Ava kept glancing into the side mirror, as if searching for something lurking behind us. When I inquired about her broken-down car, her tale shifted subtly with each recounting. "So, what kind of car do you drive?" I asked, attempting to anchor the details casually. Ava paused, a beat too long, before responding, "Oh, it's a blue sedan, nothing special." Yet I distinctly recalled her mentioning it was red earlier. My unease deepened as I realized we were now traversing the most isolated stretch of the route, surrounded by dense forest for miles. That's when I noticed, as the headlights flickered in my rearview mirror, a car surged forward from behind, its speed unmistakable. Ava noticed it too, and in a heartbeat, her entire demeanor shifted. The grateful, trembling girl was replaced by someone entirely different. Cold, calculating, and dangerous. "Pull over," she commanded, her voice sharp and unyielding. "What? Why?" I stammered, my heart beginning to race. "Just do it," she snapped, reaching into her jacket. The glint of metal caught my eye, a gun. A chill ran through me as the realization dawned. This was no mere chance encounter. It was a setup. I slowed the van, my mind racing with the implications of what was unfolding before me. In that fleeting moment of hesitation, I felt as if time had stopped. I was paralyzed, caught between the instinct to flee and the reality of our situation. But Ava, with a sudden resolve, took the reins. She yanked the wheel sharply to the right, and the van lurched violently. I struggled to regain control, but the tires veered onto the soft shoulder, and we were moving too fast. The world around us became a blur as the van rolled, once, then twice, before finally settling on its side in the ditch. For a heartbeat, there was an eerie stillness, broken only by the soft hiss of the radiator and the ringing in my ears. Then, like a tide, pain washed over me, throbbing fiercely where my head had met the unforgiving surface window, and I could feel warm blood trickling down my face. I blinked, trying to orient myself. Ava was gone, the passenger door hanging open above me. Outside, I could hear voices, male voices. "Check the van," someone shouted. "Make sure he's alive. Boss wants him breathing." Panic gave me a strength I didn't know I had. I unbuckled my seatbelt, falling awkwardly onto the driver's side door. Every movement sent shards of pain through my body, but I forced myself to move. The back of the van was a mess, packages strewn everywhere, but in the midst of chaos, my eyes caught a glimpse of salvation. A small pry bar, a tool once used for stubborn crates. I seized it just as a face emerged from the shattered windshield. A man in his mid-30s, a scar tracing down his cheek, stared at me with wide eyes. "He's awake!" he shouted to someone lurking behind him. I couldn't afford to let him utter another word. With every ounce of strength, I swung the pry bar, and it met him with a sickening crunch, sending him reeling back with a cry of pain. With determination, I used the bar to pry open the driver's side door just enough to slip through, my heart racing as I made my escape as I emerged from the wreckage. My heart raced at the sight of my attackers. 4 figures, including Ava, all armed and gazing at me with a blend of surprise and anger. "Don't move," one of them growled, raising his gun. But fear propelled me forward, and I was already running, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I plunged into the forest, branches whipping against my face as I crashed through the underbrush. Behind me, their shouts echoed, gradually fading as I put distance between us. Yet, I couldn't afford to slow down. I ran until my lungs burned, driven by the primal instinct to survive, and my legs felt heavy, like lead. And it was only then that I allowed myself to pause, collapsing behind a fallen tree. I strained my ears, listening intently for any sign of pursuit, but all I could hear were the familiar sounds of the forest at night. As my breathing began to slow, the reality of my situation settled in. I was lost in the woods, injured, with no phone and no clear direction towards safety, while somewhere out there, 4 armed individuals were hunting me. I allowed myself a fleeting moment of despair, but just a moment. I couldn't afford to give up. I had to keep moving. Using the stars to guide my way, I began to walk, and every shadow made me jump. Every snapping twig sent my heart racing. Yet I pressed on. Hours passed, and the sky began to lighten, the first rays of dawn breaking through the trees. Then, like a miracle, I heard it, the distant sound of traffic. New energy flooded through me, and I quickened my pace, following the sound. Finally, the trees thinned, and I found myself on the edge of a highway. A different highway than the one I'd been on, but a path to salvation nonetheless. I flagged down the first car I saw, probably looking like a madman with a bloodied face and torn clothes. The elderly couple inside appeared terrified, yet they paused. "Please," I gasped. "I need help. Someone's after me." They must have seen the desperation in my eyes, for the man nodded and unlocked the doors. "Get in, son. We'll take you to the police." As we drove, I recounted my harrowing night, and the couple listened in shocked silence, the woman clutching her husband's arm. At the police station, my story was met with skepticism at first, but as I described Ava and the others in detail, I noticed recognition dawning in their expressions. The detective's eyes were heavy with concern as he shared the unsettling news. "We've received reports of a group operating along I-80, he said, his voice low and serious. They were targeting lone drivers, particularly truckers and delivery personnel. Yet, this was the first instance where someone had managed to escape and share their tale. In the weeks that followed, I collaborated with the police, providing statements and examining mugshots. They located my van, but Ava and her accomplice had disappeared without a trace. Returning to my old job felt impossible. The mere thought of navigating those desolate roads at night gripped me with a chilling dread. But, in a peculiar way, Ava and her crew had bestowed upon me a gift, a story, a warning. I began to write, sharing my experiences online, and it struck a chord with many, particularly fellow drivers. Before long, I found myself giving talks, advocating for improved safety measures for long-haul drivers and couriers. My close encounter with death had ignited a new sense of purpose within me. Though I still find myself glancing over my shoulder more often than I would prefer, I understand that by voicing my story, I may help others avoid a similar fate. For out there, on those shadowy highways, not everyone who seeks assistance has good intentions. Sometimes, a victim finds that the true peril lies in an eagerness to trust a stranger. The first footprint I encountered could have belonged to me, the second perhaps to another hiker. But the third, perfectly formed and undeniably not mine, sent a shiver through me. Someone was trailing me, and in the expansive wilderness of the Rockies, that could signify only one thing. I was being hunted. I had always cherished solo camping. There's a unique beauty in the solitude, a raw connection with nature that eludes you in the company of others. This trip was meant to be my escape, a week-long trek through some of the most beautiful and isolated terrain in Colorado. I had planned meticulously, packing enough supplies to last me 10 days, just in case. A satellite phone was my only concession to safety, and even that I had promised myself I would use only in the direst emergency. The first 3 days unfolded just as I had hoped. The weather was perfect, crisp mountain air filling my lungs as I hiked through alpine meadows and dense forests. At night, I would drift off to sleep, lulled by the sounds of the wilderness and the stillness of the early morning, with the nearby stream whispering softly and the Milky Way stretching overhead in a dazzling display unseen in the city. I awoke just before dawn, as I often did, eager to break camp and embark on my journey. It was on this fourth morning that a chill crept into the air. As I emerged from my tent, I noticed something unusual, a set of footprints imprinted in the soft earth nearby. At first, I brushed it off, convincing myself that I must have made them the night before and simply forgotten. But as my gaze followed the trail, a shiver ran down my spine. The footprints circled my entire campsite, drawing ever closer, right up to my tent. At one point as I lay there, a chilling realization crept over me. Someone had been watching me sleep. My hands trembled as I hurriedly packed my gear into my backpack, faster than I ever had before. Part of me yearned to reach for the satellite phone, to call for help, but what could I possibly say? I had only seen some footprints, no tangible proof of danger. The rational part of my mind wrestled with logical explanations, urging me to dismiss the unease. Yet, I continued on my planned route, now infused with a sense of urgency. Every snapping twig and rustle in the underbrush sent jolts of fear through me, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder, ever watchful. As the shadows deepened around me, over my shoulder, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. By midday, I was exhausted more from the constant state of alertness than from the physical exertion. I stopped by a small lake to refill my water bottles and try to calm my nerves. That's when I saw the reflection in the water, a figure standing on the ridge above me, partially hidden by a tree. I whirled around, my heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Had I imagined it, the stress playing tricks on my mind? I didn't stay to find out. I grabbed my pack, and as I began to move once more, the thought of my planned route faded away, replaced by a singular focus, to distance myself from whatever presence lurked in the shadows. With each passing hour, the signs became increasingly difficult to ignore. A freshly broken branch here, a disturbed patch of moss there, subtle hints that someone was shadowing my path, always just out of sight. By the time I settled in for the night, I was a bundle of nerves. Every flicker of shadow seemed to dance. Every rustle of sound felt like a looming threat. I chose not to light a fire, opting instead to swallow a cold meal, the chill of the night creeping closer around me. Trail mix and beef jerky made sleep impossible. I leaned against a tree, a small folding knife gripped tightly in my hand, straining my eyes against the enveloping darkness. In the early hours of the morning, I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, circling my campsite. I held my breath, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, which seemed to echo from all around me. Then, a voice, low and gravelly, cut through the silence. "I know you're awake. Why don't you come out and say hello?" Terror gripped me. This was real. This was happening. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. Tio stammer out, "What do you want?" A chuckle, cold and mirthless, echoed in the stillness. "What do I want? Oh, city boy. Out here, it's not about want. It's about need. And right now, I need you to start running." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted, leaving my tent and most of my gear behind. The only things I had were what I'd been clutching all night: my knife, the satellite phone, and a small pack with some water and energy bars. I ran blindly through the forest, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear him. Not running, but moving steadily. He felt a calm confidence wash over him. These woods were familiar, his territory, while I was merely prey. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I allowed myself to slow down, gasping for breath. I couldn't keep running forever. A plan was necessary. With trembling hands, I pulled out the satellite phone, praying for a signal. One bar, it would have to do. Just as I began to dial, a sharp crack split the air. The phone exploded in my hand, pieces of plastic and electronics scattering across the forest floor. The shot had come from behind me, too close for comfort. The voice called out closer. Now that would be cheating. This is between you and me, city boy. I ran again, fueled by a new surge of adrenaline, but I knew I couldn't outrun him forever. I needed to outsmart him. I found a stream and started following it downstream, hoping the water would mask my scent and cover my tracks. As I moved, my mind raced, trying to recall every survival tip I'd ever read or seen on TV. After about a mile, I veered off, suddenly backtracking along the bank before setting off in a new direction. I hoped it might buy me some time, making him believe I was still following the stream. I discovered a dense thicket and crawled inside, striving to slow my breathing, to become as silent and still as possible. I waited. Hours slipped by, the sun climbing higher in the sky, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold fear that gripped me. I heard him pass by twice, muttering to himself, clearly frustrated at having lost my trail. As dusk approached, I understood I had to move. I couldn't remain hidden any longer. Forever, and I was no closer to safety than I had been this morning. Slowly, carefully, I emerged from my hiding spot. That's when I saw it, a glint of metal in the fading light, a trap not 10 feet from where I'd been hiding. If I'd tried to run earlier, I would have stumbled right into it. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just tracking me, he was hurting me, driving me towards his traps. This wasn't a spur of the moment hunt. This was a game he played before. With this new understanding came a grim with a steady resolve. I refused to remain his prey any longer. It was time to shift the balance of power. I began to move again, but this time with intention. I laid false trails, doubled back on myself, and employed every trick I could conjure to obscure my path. All the while, I remained vigilant, searching for traps and signs of his presence. As night descended, I stumbled upon what I sought, his camp. It was cleverly concealed, yet in his overconfidence, he had underestimated me. He had not anticipated that his prey would rise to become the hunter. From the shadows, I observed as he returned, his frustration palpable at having lost my trail. He threw down his rifle and slumped by the fire, muttering curses. This was my chance. I crept closer, my hand tightening around my small knife. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. A twig snapped under my foot, and his head whipped around, eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Prey and predator, roles suddenly reversed. Then everything happened at once. He lunged for his rifle, and I threw myself forward, knife outstretched. We collided, rolling on the ground, each fighting for survival. He was stronger. In the midst of chaos, desperation took hold of me. My knife found its mark, and he gasped, more in surprise than in pain, before falling still. Shock washed over me as I scrambled away, but there was no room for regret or moral dilemmas. I seized his rifle and satellite phone, then ran. It took search and rescue 2 days to find me. By then, I was dehydrated, exhausted, and teetering on the edge of collapse. As the helicopter lifted me to safety, I gazed down at the vast wilderness below. It no longer appeared beautiful. It had transformed into a mere refuge, a place to hide, bodies the authorities discovered at his camp, along with evidence of other victims. The man who had hunted me was wanted in 3 states for a series of disappearances. In the end, my nightmare had saved lives. The moment I saw my reflection blink, I knew something was terribly wrong. I stood frozen in front of the bathroom mirror, my heart pounding as I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew the truth. Someone had been watching me, and they were much closer than I ever could have imagined. It was supposed to, after months of grueling work and a difficult breakup, I sought a relaxing getaway. I decided to treat myself to a week-long stay at a secluded cabin in the woods. The listing had promised peace, quiet, and all the modern amenities a city girl like me could desire. It seemed perfect. Upon my arrival, I was immediately charmed. The cabin was rustic yet beautifully maintained, featuring a cozy living room, a fully equipped kitchen, and a bedroom that overlooked a serene lake. The owner, a friendly older woman named Margaret, welcomed me with a quick tour before handing over the keys. "Now don't you worry about a thing," she'd said with a warm smile. "You've got the whole place to yourself. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. It's just you and nature out here." If only I'd known how wrong she was. The first couple of days were blissful. I spent my time hiking the nearby trails, reading on the porch, and generally decompressing from the stress of city life. By the third day, I felt more relaxed than I had in years. That evening, I decided to treat myself to a long hot bath. As I soaked in Theus, I settled into the claw-foot tub. The lavender-scented bubbles began to dissolve the remnants of my tension. It was then that I noticed something peculiar about the mirror hanging on the opposite wall. A small dark spot lingered in the corner, hardly noticeable unless one was truly attentive. My curiosity piqued. I stepped out of the tub, wrapping myself in a towel, my wet feet leaving damp prints on the wooden floor. As I drew closer to the mirror, the realization struck me. It was a camera lens, cleverly concealed within the ornate frame. A chill ran through me. Someone had been watching. How long had it been there? How many other guests had unknowingly been recorded in their most private moments? With shaking hands, I began to search the rest of the bathroom. Now that I knew what to look for, I found 2 more hidden cameras, one in the light fixture, another disguised as a coat hook. Panic rose in my throat as I moved to the bedroom. More cameras awaited me there, in the living room, the kitchen, even on the porch. They were everywhere. I felt violated, exposed, and utterly terrified. Who was watching? What did they want? I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police, but there was no signal. Of course, I was miles from the nearest cell tower. That's when I heard it. A soft creak from somewhere in the house. I froze, straining my ears. Another creak, closer this time, footsteps. Someone was inside. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a heavy brass candlestick on the mantel. I grabbed it, its weight reassuring in my hands. The footsteps were in the hallway now, approaching the living room where I stood. I raised the candlestick. My heart pounded so hard I was certain it echoed in the stillness of the night. A figure emerged in the doorway. A man, tall and lean, with a face that struck a chord of recognition deep within me. It was Margaret Marate, the owner, or rather, it was Margaret stripped of her wig and makeup. "Well, well," he said, his voice now devoid of the warm, motherly tone I once knew. "Looks like my little mouse has figured out the game." I tightened my grip on the candlestick, my mind racing. "Who are you? What do you want?" He chuckled, a sound that sent icy shivers down my spine. "Who I am doesn't matter. As for what I want, well, let's just say you're not the first guest to offer me a chilling form of entertainment." His words twisted in a way that made my stomach churn. "The cameras, how long had they been watching?" "Oh, years now," he replied, stepping closer. I instinctively backed away, the coffee table a fragile barrier between us. "You'd be amazed how much people will pay for the right kind of footage. And you, my dear, have been quite the star performer." A surge of rage pierced through my fear. "You sick bastard. I'm calling the police." He laughed again, pulling something from his pocket. "My cell phone, I'm afraid. It seems that the situation is quite dire, and caution is paramount when it comes to your belongings." I cast a fleeting glance at the door, contemplating a desperate escape. But there he stood, an imposing figure blocking my only chance at freedom. I could sense the urgency. If I made a move, he would be upon me in mere moments. His voice shifted, taking on a chilling professionalism as he laid out our options. "We have 2 paths before us," he stated. "You can choose to fight or flee, but I assure you that won't end well. Alternatively, you can comply and follow my instructions. Who knows? You might even find a strange satisfaction in this new role." The very idea of yielding to such a creature sent shivers down my spine. Yet I steeled myself against the rising tide of dread. My shoulders slumped, and I allowed myself to appear defeated as I lowered the candlestick. "That's better," he said, a triumphant smile spreading across his face as he took another step closer. "I knew you'd see reason." That was the moment I made my move. As he reached for me, I swung the candlestick with all my might. It connected with his head with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the floor. I didn't wait to see if he was out cold. I ran, snatching my phone from where it had fallen. I burst out of the cabin and into the cool night air, my bare feet touching the ground softly, slapping against the dirt path as I sprinted towards the main road. I could hear him behind me, shouting threats and obscenities. But fear gave me a speed I didn't know I possessed. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. Finally, blessedly, I saw headlights in the distance. A car was approaching on the main road. I waved my arms frantically, praying they'd stop. The car slowed, then pulled over. An elderly couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Please," I gasped. "You have to help me. There's a man, he's—" After I got in, they didn't ask any questions. The woman opened the back door, and I scrambled inside. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of a figure emerging from the woods in the rearview mirror. Even from a distance, I could sense his rage. At the police station, my story was met with initial skepticism, but when they raided the cabin, they discovered not only the cameras but also hard drives filled with footage of me and countless other victims. The man, whose real name turned out to be Gerald Simmons, was arrested. The investigation revealed a sophisticated operation that, for years, he had been running, selling videos on the dark web, catering to those with deep pockets. In the weeks that followed, I found it difficult to come to terms with what had transpired. The violation, the fear, the unsettling knowledge that intimate moments of my life were now out there, potentially viewed by countless strangers. Yet, as I worked with a therapist and connected with other survivors, I began to find my voice. I started to speak out, advocating for stricter regulations on vacation rentals and raising awareness about hidden cameras. That it has been a year since that fateful encounter, and I would be remiss to claim that I have fully moved on. I find myself scanning for hidden cameras in every corner I traverse, and the shadows of nightmares still linger, whispering of being observed. Yet, amidst this turmoil, I am gradually mending, piece by piece. Each time I recount my tale, and each time I catch a glimmer of understanding and appreciation in another's gaze, I realize that from the depths of my ordeal, a flicker of light has emerged. Now, when I gaze into the mirror, I no longer see a victim. Instead, I recognize a survivor, a warrior, and a guardian. The cabin in the woods may have taken something from me, but it has also bestowed a profound gift, me a purpose, and in the end that's worth more than any peaceful getaway ever could be. The first gunshot shattered the silence of the night, and with it my illusion of safety. In that instant I realized that this wasn't just a routine break, in this was something far more dangerous, and I was trapped in the middle of it. I'd been working as a night security guard at the Millbrook Industrial Complex for just over 3 months. It was an easy gig, or so I thought. The complex was massive, a sprawling maze of warehouses and office buildings on the outskirts of town, but at night it was a ghost town. My job was simple: make my rounds, check the locks, and keep an eye on the security cameras. That night started like any other. I arrived for my shift at 10 p.m. As I took over from William, the evening guard, we followed our familiar handover routine, noting nothing unusual to report. It was as quiet as a graveyard, William had remarked with a chuckle as he departed. "Try not to fall asleep, Ryan," he had said, blissfully unaware of how mistaken he truly was. The clock struck 2 It was in the main security office that I first sensed an unsettling presence. My gaze drifted over the bank of monitors, each displaying feeds from cameras scattered throughout the complex. Then a flicker caught my eye, a shadow that seemed out of place. Instinctively, I straightened, my senses sharpening. There it was again, captured on another camera, a figure darting between the buildings. My heart began to race. This was no mere teenager seeking a thrill or a homeless soul in search of refuge. The way it moved, swift and deliberate, hinted at something far more ominous. With a sense of foreboding, I reached for the phone, prepared to call the police. Suddenly, the alarm blared, red lights dancing across the monitors as multiple security breaches were detected all at once. It felt orchestrated, almost too precise. As I grasped my radio to alert the off-site security team, the first gunshot shattered the silence, its echo reverberating through the desolate complex. Muzzle flashes flickered on one of the cameras, and a chill ran through me. This was no ordinary break-in. It was an armed assault. Instinctively, I knew I should remain where I was, lock the door, and we were trained to wait for the police, a lesson ingrained in us. Yet, a restless urge stirred within me, compelling me to uncover the truth of their pursuit, to intervene if I could. With a flashlight in hand and my key card tucked away, I quietly slipped from the security office. The complex, now draped in an unsettling stillness, felt different. The alarm had ceased its wailing after a mere 60 seconds, a precaution to keep the chaos at bay. In the distance, I could discern muffled voices mingling with the sharp sound of shattering glass. I treaded softly through the labyrinth of corridors, the squeak of my shoes echoing against the polished floors, each step a whisper in the night. Every shadow danced as I moved through the dimly lit halls, each sound echoing in the heavy silence. As I turned a corner, I caught sight of them. 3 figures cloaked in black, their faces hidden beneath ski masks, intent on breaching a high-security lab, a place I had never been allowed to enter. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart racing in my chest. What was I thinking? Here I was, just a mere rent-a-cop armed with nothing but a flashlight, standing against armed intruders. It felt utterly mad, yet I couldn't simply turn away. Whatever lay within that lab held a significance that compelled these men to risk everything that I in a moment of desperation. I found myself contemplating a daring move. My gaze swept the room, searching for anything that could serve as a weapon or a diversion. Then, my eyes fell upon the fire alarm mounted on the wall. It was a gamble. The blaring noise could reveal my hiding place to the intruders, yet it might also send them fleeing in fear. With a steadying breath, I shattered the glass and pulled the lever. The response was immediate. Sirens erupted, and the sprinklers unleashed a torrent of water, soaking everything in mere seconds. I could hear the startled shouts and angry exclamations echoing from around the corner. Seizing the moment of chaos, I cautiously peered out, my heart racing in the thick, tense air around the edge. The men were no longer at the lab door. They were running, heading towards the exit. Relief flooded through me. It had worked. They were leaving. But then one of them stopped, turning back. Even through the ski mask, I could see his eyes narrow as they landed on me. "Hey!" he shouted, raising his gun. I didn't think I ran. Bullets whizzed past me as I sprinted down the corridor, zigzagging to make myself a harder target. I could hear their footsteps behind me, gaining ground. I knew the layout of the complex better than they did. It was my only advantage. I took a sharp left, then a right, leading them deeper into the maze of hallways. My lungs burned as I ran, fear and adrenaline propelling me faster than I had ever moved. I needed a place to hide, somewhere I could lose them. The basement. An idea struck me like a bolt of lightning. The basement level was a warren of storage rooms and maintenance tunnels. If I could make it there, I might have a chance. I changed direction, heading for the nearest stairwell. The sound of pursuit grew closer now, their shouts echoing in the dimly lit corridors. Echoing off the walls, I burst through the stairwell door and practically flew down the steps, taking them 3 at a time behind me. I heard the door slam open again. They were right on my heels. The basement level was dark, emergency lights casting long shadows. I ran down the main corridor, my wet shoes slipping on the concrete floor. Left, right, another left. I turned corners at random, hoping to lose them. In the maze, my chest felt like it was going to explode, but I didn't dare slow down. Finally, I spotted what I was in search of: a small maintenance closet. I found one nestled in a quiet corner. With a swift motion, I yanked the door open and squeezed myself inside, pulling it shut behind me. The space was tiny, barely accommodating my presence, and it carried the scent of cleaning products mingled with dampness. I held my breath, straining to catch any hint of movement outside. Footsteps approached, their pace slowing as they neared my hiding place. I could hear their heavy breathing just beyond the fragile barrier of the door. "Where'd he go?" one of them growled. "Check every door," another replied. "He's got to be here somewhere." I closed my eyes, bracing for what might come next as I willed myself to become invisible. My hand tightened around the flashlight, ready to wield it as a weapon if the need arose. The doorknob rattled, and I tensed, bracing for the worst. Then, a sound that made my heart soar pierced the tension. Police sirens, growing louder by the second. One of the men exclaimed, "We've got to go now!" I heard their hurried footsteps fading into the distance. Still, I remained motionless in that closet, trembling with a mix of adrenaline and relief, until the unmistakable sound of police radios filled the air. Footsteps when I finally emerged. I was greeted by a team of very surprised police officers. The story spilled out of me in a rush, the break-in, the chase, everything. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the complex, I sat in the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket draped over my shoulders. The police had caught 2 of the 3 intruders as they tried to escape. The third was still at large. Detective Ava Nguyen, the lead investigator, approached me with a grim expression. "You took one hell of a risk tonight, Ryan," she said, her tone a mix of concern and disbelief, with a mix of admiration and exasperation. I listened as the detective recounted the events. "Thanks to our efforts, we had thwarted a significant theft at a lab housing prototype technology worth millions." I nodded, still grappling with the whirlwind of events. "Who were they?" I inquired. Detective Nguyen sighed, her expression turning grave. "Professional thieves working for a rival company. We've been tracking their operation for months, but we never anticipated they would be this audacious." She paused, fixing me with a serious gaze. "You know, the department could really use someone with your quick thinking and bravery." As I pondered a career in law enforcement, a chuckle escaped me. Just 12 hours prior, I was a board security guard, counting down the minutes until my shift came to a close. Now here I was, being recruited by the police. The sun began to rise over the industrial complex, casting a golden glow over the remnants of my long night. In that moment, I understood a profound truth. Life can shift in an instant. One moment, you're merely going through the motions, and the next, you find yourself running for your life, making split-second decisions that could alter everything. Between life and death, I found myself at a crossroads, uncertain whether to accept Detective Chan's intriguing offer. Yet, one truth lingered in my mind. My mundane security job would never appear quite so dull again, for it is often the most ordinary nights that unfold into extraordinary tales, revealing that even the most unlikely individuals, perhaps even oneself, can emerge as heroes when the moment demands it. The instant the door slammed shut behind me, a chill ran down my spine. I realized I had stepped into a realm of shadows, the echo of that sound resonating through the empty house, a haunting finality that sent shivers through the air. Chills ran down my spine as I found myself ensnared, the family-friendly facade of my clients shattering to unveil something far more sinister. What was meant to be a routine showing, as a real estate agent in the upscale neighborhood of Maple Ridge, turned into an unsettling experience. I had conducted hundreds of these viewings, and the Jensen property was a gem, a sprawling 6-bedroom mansion equipped with all the luxuries the affluent clientele in this area desired. A pool, a home theater, a wine cellar, you name it, this place had it. When the walkers reached out to me about viewing the property, I felt a thrill of excitement. At it appeared that I had encountered the ideal buyers. A prosperous businessman, his graceful wife, and their 2 impeccably behaved children. They possessed both the resources and the eagerness to finalize a swift sale. As I arrived at the Jensen house on that bright Saturday afternoon, I felt a wave of fortune wash over me. The Walkers were already there, looking every bit the part in their country club attire. Mrs. Reeves and Mr. Walker welcomed me with a firm handshake. "Thank you for meeting us on such short notice. Please call me Ava," she said. I responded with my most charming sales smile as we embarked on our tour. I guided them through the house, highlighting its many features, from the gourmet kitchen to the luxurious master suite. The Walkers appeared intrigued, engaging with all the right questions. Mrs. Walker showed a keen interest in the security system, which I confidently assured her was top-notch. However, it was when we descended into the basement that an unsettling atmosphere began to creep in. Mr. Walker's inquiries grew more intense, fixating on the layout and any possible hidden spaces. "You never know when you might need a panic room," he quipped, but there was an unspoken tension in the AI or an edge to his voice that made me uneasy. As we climbed the stairs back to the main floor, I felt Mrs. Walker's hand on my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Ava dear," she said, her voice sickly sweet, "would you mind if we took another look at the master bedroom? I have a few more questions about the closet space." I nodded, leading the way back upstairs. Mr. Walker and the children stayed in the living room, engrossed in what looked like a heated discussion. The master bedroom was at the end of a long hallway. As we entered, I began my familiar tale about the custom cabinetry and designer fixtures. I noticed Mrs. Walker's gaze fixed on me with an unsettling intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. "You know, Ava," she said, stepping closer, "we're not really here to buy a house." My heart skipped a beat, confusion washing over me. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," I managed to reply. Her smile widened, revealing an unsettling number of teeth. "Oh, I think you do, or at least you will." In that moment, a sharp pain pierced my neck. I turned to find Mr. Walker looming behind me, an empty syringe glinting in his hand. When had he come upstairs? "What did you do to me?" My vision is already starting to blur. "Don't worry, dear. Everything will make sense soon." The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the sound of their laughter, cold and cruel. When I came to, I found myself in a dimly lit room I didn't recognize. My head was pounding, and my mouth felt like it was stuffed with cotton. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, a growing horror settled in. I was in some sort of cell. The walls were concrete, and the heavy metal door loomed as the sole escape. Panic washed over me, memories rushing in like a tide. The Walkers, the house, the injection. This couldn't be real. Such horrors were not meant for someone like me. I attempted to rise, but my legs betrayed me, trembling beneath me. That's when I caught sight of it. A thick metal shackle, firmly clasped around my ankle, tethered to a bolt in the floor. I was undeniably ensnared. Hours slipped by, or perhaps it was days. Time became a mere whisper in that windowless chamber. I drifted between thoughts in the dim light. I found myself in a state of frantic attempts to escape, punctuated by moments of despair as I huddled in the corner, tears streaming down my face. Then, the door creaked open, and in walked Mr. Walker, impeccably dressed in his expensive suit. "Ah, good you're awake," he said, his tone casual, as if we were merely meeting for a business lunch. "I hope you're finding your accommodations adequate." My voice, hoarse from screaming, barely managed to ask, "Why are you doing this?" He chuckled softly, a chilling sound that echoed in the silence. "Why does anyone do anything, Ava? For profit, of course. You see, there are people out there willing to pay a great deal of money for someone like you. Young and attractive, I was educated, and I knew I would fetch a high price on the right market." The weight of his words struck me like a physical blow. Human trafficking. The horror stories I had heard on the news suddenly morphed into my own reality. "You won't get away with this," I said, attempting to sound braver than I felt. "People will look for me. The police. The police." He laughed softly. "My dear, we've been doing this for years. By the time anyone realizes you're missing, you'll be long gone. Just another real estate agent who skipped town with her clients' deposits. It's a surprisingly common occurrence, you know? He turned to leave, pausing at the door. Try to get some rest. We have a long journey ahead of us tomorrow. As the door slammed shut, I felt something inside me break. This was really happening. I was going to be sold like cattle, shipped off to God knows where, never to be seen again. But as the initial shock wore off, something else took its place. Anger, determination. I refused to be a victim. I had to find a way out. I examined every inch of my cell, looking for weaknesses. The chain was solid as the walls, impenetrable, yet the door's hinges appeared old and rusty. If only I could somehow reach them. I tore a strip of fabric from my blouse, braiding it with care, striving to make it as strong as possible. Then, I turned my attention to the bolt in the floor. It was secure, but the concrete surrounding it crumbled beneath my touch. If I could just loosen it enough. Hours slipped by as I toiled, my fingers becoming bloody and raw. At last, I felt the bolt yield, granting me freedom from the chain. With my makeshift rope, I reached for the door hinges, which were as I stood there, feeling the weight of the moment, I noticed the door, weak as it was, beginning to creak and bend under pressure. Just then, the satisfying snap of the last hinge echoed in the stillness. Footsteps reverberated down the hall, growing closer. I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, my heart racing. This was my only chance. The door swung open, and in stepped Mrs. Walker, her voice cutting through the tension. "Time to go, dear. You're new." I didn't allow her to finish. With all my strength, I surged forward, knocking her off balance. She stumbled, her head striking the concrete wall with a sickening thud, and in that moment, the world around me seemed to hold its breath. I didn't pause to check if she was all right. I dashed down the hallway, which felt like it stretched on forever, doors lining both sides. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the heavy thud of footsteps pursuing me. As I turned a corner, I spotted it, a window. Without a moment's thought, I hurled myself at it. The glass shattered, and a sharp pain coursed through me as shards sliced into my skin, but I pressed on. I tumbled out onto the soft grass, the cool night air brushing against my face. I found myself in a backyard, surrounded by high fences, but there, in the corner, was a gate, my escape. I ran with a fervor I had never known before, ignoring the pain, the fear, and in everything except the need to escape. I cleared the gate in a single, adrenaline-fueled leap and found myself on a quiet suburban street. The lights were on in nearby houses. I ran to the closest one, pounding on the door. "Help! Please call the police." An elderly woman opened the door, her eyes widening in shock at my appearance. I must have looked like a mad woman, covered in blood and dirt, my clothes torn. "Please," I gasped. "They're going to kill me." She ushered me inside and called 911 as we waited for the police to arrive. As I arrived, I sank onto her couch, the adrenaline finally ebbing away. The next few hours blurred into a haze of police statements and hospital visits. The Walkers were apprehended while attempting to escape the city, their home of horrors exposed as a complex human trafficking operation that had persisted for years. While I sat in the police station, cocooned in a shock blanket, Detective Johnson approached me. "You did good, Ava," he said, his voice rough yet gentle. "Thanks to you, we've dismantled one of the largest trafficking rings in the area. Today, I saved many lives." I nodded, too weary to utter a word. The ordeal had come to an end, yet I understood that the memories would linger with me for eternity. In the days that followed, as I endeavored to reconstruct my life, a decision took shape within me. I could not return to my previous job. The mere thought of stepping into unfamiliar homes filled with strangers was unbearable. Instead, I chose to channel my experiences into something meaningful. I began volunteering at a shelter for trafficking survivors, sharing my story and offering a glimmer of hope to those who believed all was lost. It was not the life I envisioned. There was a profound sense of purpose. Each time I aided someone in their struggle to break free from their own torment, I felt a surge of strength, a deeper connection to my true self. The walkers had sought to shatter my spirit, to reduce me to mere property, but their attempts only fueled my resolve to resist, not just against them, but against the very system that permits such malevolence to thrive. I stood firm against the encroaching shadows that threatened to engulf us all. I was no longer just Ava Reeves, a real estate agent. I had transformed into a survivor, a warrior, a glimmer of hope for those still ensnared in darkness and the shadows. A realization dawned upon me, one that held more weight than any commission I could have ever earned. The moment I caught sight of the glint of metal in the driver's hand, a chill ran down my spine. I understood then that I had made a grave mistake. This was not merely a ride. It was a trap, and I had unwittingly walked right into its snare. As the car sped down an unfamiliar road, my heart raced, and a single thought echoed in my mind. How could I have been so foolish? It had all begun innocently enough, with me hitchhiking across the country, embarking on a journey of self-discovery after graduating college. My backpack was light, my spirits were high, and the open road seemed full of promise. I had experienced good fortune thus far, meeting intriguing individuals and exploring parts of America I had only dreamed about. On that fateful day, I found myself standing on the side of a quiet highway for hours, my thumb out, watching car after car zoom by. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, when a blue sedan finally pulled over. The couple inside appeared harmless enough. The man, probably in his late 40s, wore a friendly smile, with crow's feet around his eyes. The woman beside him had long blonde hair and a gentle face. They introduced themselves as Michael and Lily. "Where are you headed, son?" Michael asked, his voice warm and inviting. "West," I replied. "Wherever the road takes me." Lily laughed, a melodic sound. "Well, we're heading to Phoenix. Is that west enough for you?" Relief washed over me as I grinned. "That would be perfect, thanks." I tossed my backpack in the trunk and climbed into the back seat. As we pulled away, a sense of excitement filled me. This was what hitchhiking was all about. Meeting new people and sharing stories that I in the beginning. There was a warmth in the air, a gentle exchange of stories that painted a picture of kindness. For the first hour, everything felt just right. We shared laughter and tales of my travels, while Michael, a salesman, and Lily, a graphic designer working from home, reminisced about their life in Phoenix and the stunning landscape that surrounded us. They were high school sweethearts, bound by 2 decades of marriage. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows crept in, an unsettling feeling began to weave its way into the conversation. I noticed Michael taking exits that seemed out of place, and when I brought it up, Lily's response was swift, a change in the air that sent a chill down my spine as the subject turned to my family back home. An unsettling sensation curled in my stomach. I reached for my phone, hoping to check our location, but the absence of signal reminded me that we were indeed in the middle of nowhere. "Everything okay back there?" Michael asked, his gaze locking with mine in the rearview mirror. There was a new intensity in his eyes, a hardness that hadn't been present before. "Yeah," I replied, forcing my voice to remain steady. "Just checking the time." Lily turned in her seat to face me, her smile now a mere shadow of warmth. No longer reaching her eyes, "You must be tired after all that walking. Why don't you get some rest? We'll wake you when we stop for gas." I nodded, pretending to settle in, but sleep was the last thing on my mind. I needed a plan. I needed to get out of this car. That's when I saw it. As Michael reached to adjust the radio, his jacket shifted, revealing the gun holstered at his side. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a wrong turn or a misunderstanding. These people had intentions, and I was certain they weren't good. I forced myself to stay in the stillness of the moment, I pondered the gravity of jumping from a moving car, knowing it could lead to dire consequences. Patience was my ally as I waited for the vehicle to slow, believing that an opportunity would eventually present itself. Hours drifted by, the scenery outside transforming into a barren desert, where red rocks and cacti replaced the familiar grasslands we had left behind. Michael and Lily had fallen into a heavy silence, their occasional glances sending a shiver down my spine. At last, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon, the welcoming lights of a gas station. My heart quickened. This could be the moment I had been waiting for. As we approached the pump, I took a deep breath, ready to seize my chance. "Do you mind if I use the restroom?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Sure thing, Lily. Why don't you go with him? I'll fill up the tank." My hopes deflated. They weren't going to let me out of their sight. Lily smiled, all sweetness and light. "Come on, honey, let's freshen up." As we walked towards the small convenience store, her hand on my arm felt like a vice. I glanced around desperately, looking for anyone who might help, but the station was deserted save for a bored-looking clerk in the dimly lit bathroom. I splashed water on my face, my thoughts swirling like shadows in the night. The idea of signaling the clerk flickered in my mind, but what if he was part of it all? What if Michael, ever watchful, decided to act when we returned to the car? There he was, leaning against it, smoke curling from his cigarette, a hint of tension in his voice as he asked, "All set?" I nodded, my mouth parched, fingers trembling as I reached for the back door handle. An opportunity glimmered before me. My backpack still lay in the trunk. Could I grab something from my bag real quick? I ventured. Michael hesitated, then shrugged. "Make it fast." As I approached the back of the car, my heart raced in my chest, a steady drumbeat of fear. Michael opened the trunk, and I took a moment to steady my breath. It was a pivotal moment, one that would change everything. With a swift motion, I seized my backpack and swung it with all my strength. It struck Michael's head with a dull thud, and he staggered, momentarily taken aback. Without a second thought, I fled, the sound of Lily's scream and Michael's furious shout echoing behind me. I didn't dare glance back. I ran with a desperate urgency, my feet pounding against the asphalt, then shifting to the soft embrace of sand as I veered off the road and into the vast desert. Suddenly, a gunshot pierced the night air. The bullet whizzed past my ear, yet I pressed on, running until my lungs screamed and my legs turned to jelly. Only then did I dare to glance back. In the distance, a pinprick of light marked the gas station, but there was no sign of pursuit. I had made it, but safety was still a distant dream. Alone in the vast desert, miles from civilization, I faced the harsh reality of no water and no sense of direction. The adrenaline that had propelled my escape began to fade, leaving me trembling and filled with dread. I steeled myself to think clearly. The highway lay to the east, a beacon of hope if only I could find it. I could flag down a car, seek help, but doubt gnawed at me. Could I trust anyone after the events that had unfolded? With the stars as my only guide, I began to walk. The desert night wrapped around me like a cold shroud, and I shivered in my thin t-shirt. Every sound sent a jolt through my body. The rustle of a snake slithering through the underbrush, the haunting hoot of an owl perched above. I kept my ears tuned for the comforting roar of an engine, the glow of headlights slicing through the darkness, but silence enveloped me. As the sky began to lighten, a sound reached me, lifting my spirits. A distant rumble of traffic, a promise of life beyond the shadows. With each step, I quickened my pace, pushing through the ache in my feet and the dryness in my throat. Soon, the highway emerged before me, a ribbon of asphalt slicing through the vast desert. I stumbled onto the shoulder just as the sun began to peek over the horizon. In the distance, a semi-truck appeared, and I waved my arms frantically. To my immense relief, it slowed and pulled over. The driver, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, looked at me with concern. "You okay, kid? You look like you've been through hell." I nearly wept with relief. "Please," I croaked, my voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "I need help." Some people tried to speak, but the words hung in the air, unspoken. Understanding flickered in the driver's eyes as he reached behind his seat and handed me a bottle of water. "Drink this," he said softly. "Then we'll call the cops. You're safe now." As I gulped down the water, the weight of my escape settled in. Michael and Lily weren't merely offering a ride to a lonely hitchhiker. They were predators, lurking on the open road, searching for their next victim. How many others had stumbled into their snare? How many had not been as fortunate? Fortunate as I was, the police listened intently as I shared my harrowing tale, their expressions somber as I detailed my experience. They informed me that Michael and Lily fit the description of a couple linked to a series of disappearances spanning 3 states. My escape and the details I provided offered them promising leads to pursue in the days that followed. As I continued to recount my story and grapple with the reality of what had transpired, an unsettling sensation lingered within me, a haunting awareness of how narrowly I had avoided becoming yet another statistic. What had begun as a carefree journey of self-discovery had morphed into a chilling nightmare, one that would forever echo in my mind, would linger in my thoughts for years to come. As I settled into my seat on the bus, leaving my hitchhiking days behind, a realization washed over me. I had survived. I had outsmarted them, outrun them. They had attempted to make me a victim, but instead, they had forged me into a survivor. The open road still beckoned, yet now I understood its perils as well as its allure. I would travel again someday, but with my eyes wide open, aware that behind every friendly smile might hide a shadow. My journey of self-discovery was far from over. It had merely taken an unexpected turn. It was unexpected. Yet in the end, I uncovered something essential: my own strength, my will to survive. It wasn't the lesson I had intended to learn, but it was one that would remain with me forever. The creak of the cabin door sent a chill through me. I had been alone in these woods for days, but as the handle began to turn slowly, I understood that my solitude had been a mere illusion. Someone was here, and judging by the hushed whispers and metallic clicks that drifted in from outside, they were not the welcoming kind. What had begun as a simple solo venture had taken a dark turn. It was a hiking trip I had been planning for months, eager to escape the chaos of city life and reconnect with nature. The Appalachian Trail seemed like the perfect challenge: beautiful, rugged, and just remote enough to offer the solitude I craved. The first few days were everything I had hoped for. I reveled in the crisp mountain air, the stunning vistas, and the profound silence that settled over the forest at night. My muscles ached from the long days of hiking, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind that reminded me I was alive. As I ventured forth, pushing my limits, the 4th day brought an unexpected change. Dark clouds gathered ominously, unleashing a torrential downpour that showed no signs of relenting. A sense of urgency washed over me. I needed to find shelter, and quickly. Then, through the veil of rain, I caught sight of it: an old cabin partially concealed by the trees. Initially, a wave of relief swept over me. The cabin appeared abandoned, its windows shrouded in darkness, a thick layer of moss draping the roof. Yet it stood sturdy and, most importantly, dry. I decided it would be the perfect refuge to wait out the storm before continuing my journey once the rain had passed. With determination, I approached the cabin. With a gentle voice, I called out a soft hello, hoping to find someone within the stillness of the house. When silence answered, I approached the door, and to my astonishment, it opened with a quiet creak, the hinges protesting softly. Inside, the air was thick with a musty scent, yet the space was surprisingly well kept. A fine layer of dust cloaked the surfaces, but the furniture remained intact. A small table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove nestled in the corner, and a narrow bed resting against the far wall. It seemed as though the previous occupant had simply stepped away one day, leaving everything behind. I placed my backpack down and began to wander through the quiet rooms, discovering a few hidden corners of this forgotten place. Old canned goods sat quietly in the cupboards, their labels faded yet still legible. A collection of dusty books lined a small shelf, mostly field guides and local history. It was evident that the previous occupant had been a true outdoorsman. As the day wore on and the rain continued its relentless patter, I resolved to make the best of the situation. I managed to get a fire going in the stove, its warmth pushing back the damp chill that lingered in the air. I even stumbled upon an old deck of cards and spent the evening playing solitaire by candlelight. It felt almost cozy. For the first time in days, a wave of true relaxation washed over me. The gentle patter of rain on the roof and the soft crackling of the fire wrapped me in a comforting embrace, lulling me into a deep sense of security. That night, I drifted off to sleep, feeling safe and content. When morning arrived, I awoke to find the rain had ceased, but a thick fog had settled over the forest, shrouding everything in mystery. Visibility was poor, and I understood that navigating the trail under such conditions would be unwise. I accepted my fate, settling in for another day in the cabin, grateful for its protective shelter. It was mid-afternoon when I first sensed something unusual while reorganizing my backpack. It was a quiet evening, and I could have sworn I saw a flicker of movement outside the window, just a brief glimpse in the mist, vanishing almost as quickly as it appeared. I reassured myself it was likely just an animal, a deer perhaps, or a large bird. But then, I heard it, a twig snapping, followed by the unmistakable sound of hushed voices. My heart began to race as I moved to the window, straining to see through the fog. For a moment, there was nothing, and then, like phantoms emerging from the mist, I saw them. 3 figures moving with purpose toward the cabin. Panic set in. Who were they? What did they want? My mind raced with questions as I raced through the possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that lost hikers wouldn't move with such stealth. Rangers would announce themselves, but these people, whoever they were, seemed intent on remaining unseen. Frantically, I searched for a place to hide. The cabin was small, offering few options. Under the bed felt too obvious, and the cupboards were too cramped. Then, my eyes fell upon a hatch in the ceiling that I hadn't noticed before. An attic. With trembling hands, I pulled down the ladder and climbed it up, dragging my backpack along with me. Just in time, I managed to. As I closed the hatch, a chill ran down my spine. I heard them at the door, the creak of hinges, footsteps on the wooden floor, and then voices. A gruff male voice broke the silence. "Fire's still warm. Check outside." A woman's voice followed, urging caution. Make sure they didn't just step out. I held my breath, terrified that even the sound of my heartbeat might betray me. Through the gaps in the floorboards, I could see them moving below. 3 figures, just as I had glimpsed outside. 2 men and a woman, all cloaked in dark clothing. "Bag here," the second man instructed, his tone low and deliberate as the night deepened. The hiker, a woman, whispered with a sense of urgency. "If they made it this far, we'll find them." Her companion, a man, reassured her. "We can't have anyone stumbling onto our operation. The boss would have our heads." The word operation sent a chill through me, and I couldn't help but wonder what dark path I had unwittingly crossed. They continued their search of the cabin, rifling through my belongings, and I could only watch in helpless silence as they examined my wallet. "Ava Jenkins," the woman read aloud, her voice slicing through the stillness. "Got an address in Boston. Long way from home. Aren't you Ava?" I bit my lip, stifling a gasp. They knew my name. They knew where I was from. I felt the weight of my predicament settle over me, a palpable force that pressed down like a heavy fog. These were not mere criminals I had encountered. They were a real danger, and now I had become a target in their eyes. "We need to move everything," the first man declared, urgency lacing his words. "We can't risk her finding her way back here and alerting the police." The second man inquired about the girl, and a tense silence enveloped the air. My heart raced as I braced myself for the response. "We find her," the woman finally replied, her voice steely, "and we ensure she never speaks of what she witnessed." Their conversation continued, weaving a dark tapestry of intentions that as I contemplated my plans to search the surrounding area, I found myself frozen, scarcely daring to breathe. Hours slipped by, and at some point they left the cabin. Fear held me still, certain they were still out there, searching. As night fell, I heard them return, their voices low, tinged with frustration over their lack of success in finding me. They decided to sleep in shifts, ready to catch me if I dared to return in the dark. I understood that I couldn't remain in the attic forever. Sooner or later, they would think to look up here, or I might make a noise that would betray my hiding place. That I found myself in a moment of urgency, the need to escape pressing upon me. As I listened to the gentle sounds of snoring below, two asleep, one awake, I realized this was my best chance. With utmost care, I eased open the attic hatch, revealing a dark cabin illuminated only by the faint glow of dying embers in the stove. Two figures lay on the bed, while a third silhouette lingered by the window. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I knew it was now or never. I dropped from the attic landing, moving as softly as I could. The figure by the window suddenly whirled around, but I was already in motion. That I end the stillness of the night, I found myself in a frantic dance with shadows. With a swift motion, I seized the cast iron pan from the stove, swinging it with all the strength I could muster. A sickening thud echoed through the air, and the figure crumpled to the ground. The sound stirred the others from their slumber, but I was already at the door, bursting into the cool embrace of the night. My legs propelled me forward, racing blindly into the depths of the forest. Behind me, shouts pierced the silence, accompanied by the rustling of underbrush as they pursued me. I ran with a fervor I had never known, ducking beneath low-hanging branches and leaping over fallen logs. My lungs burned fiercely, and my legs protested with every step, yet the grip of fear urged me onward. Time lost its meaning as I continued to flee into the darkness. It felt like hours, and eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded, replaced by the familiar nighttime noises of the forest. Still, I didn't stop. I couldn't risk it. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, I finally allowed myself to slow down. I was lost, exhausted, and terrified, but I was alive. It took 2 more days of cautious travel before I found my way to a ranger station. The authorities were skeptical of my story at first, but a search of the area revealed evidence that corroborated my account. The cabin, and when they found, it had been cleared out, yet remnants lingered of what the police deemed an insignificant illegal operation. As I gave my statement, grappling with the reality of what had transpired, an unsettling sensation clung to me. How near I had been to becoming just another statistic, another mysterious disappearance swallowed by the vast wilderness. My tranquil hiking trip had morphed into a haunting nightmare, one that would linger in my thoughts for years. However, as I boarded the bus back to Boston, a realization washed over me. I had survived. I had outsmarted them. They had attempted to turn me into a victim, but instead, I emerged as a survivor. The mountains still beckoned to me, their beauty untouched by my trials. I understood that one day I would return to complete the journey I had begun, but next time, I would not be alone. I would carry with me the wisdom that often, the most profound threats we encounter come not from the wild, but from our own kind. The instant the truck swerved in my direction, I sensed it was no mere accident. The malice in the driver's gaze was unmistakable, even through the rain-streaked windshield. As I swerved off the road with my tires skidding on the wet asphalt, one thought blazed through my mind. They had found me, and they weren't going to let me escape this time. It had all started 3 days ago when I was driving cross-country, moving from New York to Los Angeles for a fresh start after a messy divorce. The long, lonely stretches of highway through the Midwest were monotonous, but I found a strange peace in the solitude. That peace was shattered at a nondescript gas station just outside of Omaha. As I filled my tank, I noticed two men engaged in a heated argument near the convenience store. Initially, I thought little of it, but then a sudden gunshot shattered the night. In the blink of an eye, one man collapsed, clutching his chest, while the other frantically scanned his surroundings. Our eyes met, and in that fleeting moment, I saw the gun in his hand and the raw panic etched across his face. It was clear I had unwittingly become a witness to a scene I was never meant to behold. My heart raced as I jumped into my car, my hands trembling so violently that inserting the key into the ignition felt like an impossible task. With a surge of adrenaline, I sped away from the gas station, the night swallowing my escape as I sat at the station. A figure caught my eye in the rearview mirror, a man running towards me. In a surge of adrenaline, I hit the highway, speeding at 90, my heart racing with each passing moment. For hours, I drove as if possessed, glancing nervously at my mirrors, convinced that at any moment, I would see a car in pursuit. When I finally allowed myself to ease off the gas, the weight of my reality settled in. I had witnessed a murder, and the killer had seen me. I was the only barrier between him and his freedom. The thought of going to the police crossed my mind, but fear gripped me. What if they dismissed my story? What if, in the stillness of the night, a sense of dread lingered in the air? The thought of a relentless pursuer, someone with connections that could pierce through the veil of safety, haunted my every move. Paranoia, a shadow cast by countless crime dramas, twisted my imagination into a web of fear, making even the simplest choices feel fraught with peril. So I drove on, through the darkness, traversing 3 states, steering clear of the main highways, opting instead for the quiet back roads and sleepy towns. Each transaction was cloaked in secrecy, paid for in cash, my identity masked by false names at motels. I kept my distance from others, interactions reduced to mere whispers. By the 3rd day, the weight of exhaustion pressed heavily upon me, the relentless vigilance and sleepless nights weaving a tapestry of fatigue that threatened to unravel my resolve. A gnawing fear settled in my gut, and the weight of it all began to feel overwhelming. I realized I couldn't sustain this any longer. A decision had to be made, a call for help sought. It was then that I noticed the truck. At first, it seemed inconsequential, just another vehicle on the road. But as the miles slipped away, I observed it lingering a few cars back, never drawing closer, yet never falling behind. Paranoia crept in. Was it my imagination, or had the sleepless nights made me overly sensitive? I took a sudden exit, my throat tightening as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The truck remained, a silent shadow in my wake. Panic surged within me, and I pressed the accelerator, heart racing as I navigated the gentle flow of traffic along the county road. The truck shadowed my movements, drawing nearer, no longer concealing its intent. The rain began to fall, heavy droplets splattering against my windshield, prompting me to switch on the wipers. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. It was then that the truck made its advance, pulling up beside me. I dared to steal a glance, and a chill coursed through me. This was not the killer from the gas station. This was a stranger, someone entirely unfamiliar. Yet, the look in his eyes revealed all I needed to know. He was here to silence me. The truck swerved towards me, metal screeching as it scraped along the side of my car. I jerked the wheel, desperately trying to keep control. We were on a bridge, concrete barriers on either side, leaving no room for error. Another vicious swerve from the truck sent me spinning. I felt a moment of weightlessness as my car broke through the barrier, then a sickening lurch as gravity took hold. The world outside my windows became a blur of gray sky and dark water as my car plummeted towards the depths below. That the river below the impact knocked the wind out of me. Cold water rushed in through shattered windows as the car began to sink. Training from a long ago swimming class kicked in. Wait for the car to fill with water. Then the pressure will equalize and you can open the door. But panic is a powerful thing. As the water rose past my chest, my seatbelt refused to unlatch. I clawed at it frantically, each second feeling like an eternity. Just as the water reached my chin, the belt finally gave way. I took one last desperate gulp of air as the car sank deeper into the water. The pressure inside began to equalize. With a surge of determination, I forced the door open and propelled myself into the cold embrace of the river. My lungs screamed for air, and my clothes felt like weights, pulling me further into the depths. The surface above seemed to drift away, and darkness crept into my vision. Just when I thought I would succumb to the depths, my head broke through the water, and I gasped, inhaling the precious air. The current was fierce, pulling me downstream, but in the distance, I spotted the bridge, the broken barrier where my car had vanished. Yet, there was no trace of the truck or its driver, only the haunting silence of the water around me as I made my way to the shore. Dragging myself from the water with trembling limbs, I finally collapsed onto the muddy bank. Coughing and shivering, I realized I was alive, yet the sense of relief was fleeting. The adrenaline began to fade, and the harsh reality of my situation settled in. I was miles from anywhere, drenched to the bone, without a car, a phone, or any understanding of who was pursuing me or why. The threat from the killer at the gas station loomed large, but now I sensed that there were others involved. This was far more complex than I had ever imagined. I knew I couldn't linger here. Whoever had run me off the road would undoubtedly come looking to ensure I was truly gone. With a heavy heart, I pushed myself up, each movement a reminder of my weary body. Help was essential, yet trust felt like a distant memory. The killer could be lurking in the shadows, even among those sworn to protect. I began my journey along the river, the chill of my damp clothes a constant companion, each step a battle against the elements. The rain had ceased, but a biting wind swept through, piercing my soaked jacket. I wrapped my arms around myself, seeking warmth as the night deepened. The full moon cast a silvery glow, guiding my path through the encroaching darkness. Shadows danced beneath the cover of trees along the riverbank, each snapping twig and rustle of leaves sending a shiver down my spine. My mind raced, piecing together the fragments of a chilling puzzle. Who were these figures lurking in the darkness? Why did they seem so desperate to silence me? What had I unwittingly stumbled into? After what felt like an eternity of cautious steps, I finally spotted lights flickering in the distance. A small town nestled in the valley, a beacon of civilization that promised help yet loomed with the threat of discovery. I approached with trepidation, sticking to the shadows as the town revealed itself. A modest main street lined with a few businesses and houses, and a diner that seemed to beckon me closer on the corner. A warm light spilled onto the sidewalk, casting a gentle glow that beckoned to the weary traveler. My stomach growled, a reminder of the nearly empty day that had passed without sustenance. But food would have to wait. Information and an escape were my priorities. My gaze drifted to a small building across the street, the local library. It may not have seemed like much, but it was a beginning. Breaking in proved easier than anticipated. Small towns often wore their trust like a badge. The window latch, flimsy and unguarded, yielded to my touch, allowing me to slip inside with a silent prayer that no alarms would sound. The computer at the front awaited my exploration. The desk, though ancient, served its purpose well. I turned to the internet, seeking information about the gas station where it all began, hoping to uncover any news of a shooting. To my surprise, there was nothing. It was as if the event had been erased from existence. I expanded my search, delving into recent crimes or any suspicious activities in the vicinity. That's when I stumbled upon a small article detailing a series of mysterious disappearances along the I-80 corridor, predominantly involving truckers. They had vanished without a trace, and the police were left with no leads. Yet, the locals spoke in hushed tones of a shadowy organization, likening them to modern-day highway pirates, preying on the unsuspecting as I ventured deeper into the shadows. A chill crept through me, igniting a sense of foreboding. Had I unwittingly uncovered a dark secret, something far more sinister than a mere act of violence? The urgency of their silence echoed in my mind. Suddenly, a noise outside startled me, and I felt the weight of my heart quicken. The headlights of a car glided past, moving with an unsettling slowness. I crouched low, my breath hitching in my throat, wondering if they had finally come for me. Time stretched on, each second feeling like an eternity, until I finally mustered the courage to glance outside. The street lay still and empty, yet an undeniable sense of danger lingered in the air. I knew I couldn't linger in this place. Safety was a fleeting illusion. With a quiet resolve, I slipped out of the library and into the enveloping darkness of the night. The ordeal was far from over. I found myself in way over my head, entangled in something I couldn't quite grasp. Yet I was alive, and as long as I drew breath, there remained a chance. I resumed my walk, this time with a sense of purpose. The destination was unclear, but I understood that stopping was not an option. They were out there, watching and waiting, and I was resolute in my determination to stay one step ahead, no matter the cost. The road unfurled before me, dark and filled with uncertainties, but for the first time since this nightmare began, a flicker of hope ignited within me. I had survived their initial attempt to ensnare me, that I in the stillness of the night, I found myself enveloped in a shroud of mystery. I had stumbled upon a fragment of the truth, a mere whisper of what lay ahead. With each step into the darkness, a single thought illuminated my path. I would uncover the secrets hidden from me, and those who sought to silence me would soon face the consequences. They believed they could extinguish my spirit, but instead, they had forged a resolve within me. As I delved deeper, the first video file flickered to life, revealing a harrowing scene of torment. The second unveiled a deal that spiraled into chaos. By the third, it dawned on me that this laptop was not merely a discarded relic. It was a gateway to something far more sinister. And so, I pressed on, drawn deeper into the shadows, gazed at the car parked across the street, a sense of unease creeping in. I understood they had come for it, and for me, it all began innocently enough. My old laptop had finally given up the ghost after years of loyal service. As a freelance graphic designer, I couldn't afford to be without a computer for long. Money was tight, so I turned to Craigslist, hoping to find a decent used machine that wouldn't break the bank. That's how I encountered Tyler. His ad appeared perfect, a high-spec laptop for a fraction of its retail price. When I arrived at the coffee shop to meet him, I felt a chill in the I in a quaint little cafe. I encountered a man in his 30s, his demeanor betraying a hint of unease as he fidgeted with his coffee cup. "You must be Ethan," he said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He handed me the laptop, and I took a moment to inspect it. It appeared to be in good condition, and when I powered it on, everything seemed to function properly. After exchanging cash, I watched as Tyler nearly dashed out of the cafe, his hurried exit leaving me to ponder his social awkwardness. Little did I know, back home, I would spend the evening setting up my new acquisition, transferring files and installing software. As the night deepened around me, it was midnight when I stumbled upon a hidden folder, buried deep within the system files, innocuously named Backup Data. Curiosity tugged at me, urging me to click, and what I found sent a chill through my veins. Video files, hundreds of them, with ominous titles like Warehouse Pickups 03 and Johnson's Interrogation. My finger hovered over the mouse, a voice in my head pleading with me not to open them. Yet the need to know was overpowering. As the first video began to play, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. A man, bloodied and bruised, was strapped to a chair as the camera rolled. A figure posed questions, their voice warped and eerie. When the man chose silence, a chilling scene unfolded. His fingernail was methodically extracted with pliers, his cries echoing in my mind long after. I shut the laptop with a jolt, my heart pounding in my chest. What had I stumbled upon? Who was Tyler truly, and who were the shadowy figures behind these unsettling videos? Sleep slipped away from me that night as I wrestled with thoughts of what to do next. Should I go to the police? But what if they were part of this dark web? The meticulous nature of what I had witnessed hinted at something far more sinister than I could have imagined. Wasn't some small-time operation. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to know more before taking any action. I spent the day combing through the files, careful not to open any more videos. There were documents, ledgers, shipping manifests, and what appeared to be coded messages. It was clear I had stumbled onto something significant, something perilous. As evening fell, I noticed a car I didn't recognize parked across the street. A dark sedan with tinted windows. It could have been nothing, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The back of my neck prickled with unease as I cautiously peered through the blinds. My heart nearly stopped when I saw him. A man sitting in the driver's seat, his gaze fixed directly on my apartment. Panic washed over me. They knew, somehow they had tracked the laptop to me. My mind raced with possibilities. Had Derek betrayed me? Was the laptop itself being monitored? I reached for my phone, ready to call 911, but hesitated. Who could I trust? If this organization was as vast as I feared, they could have eyes everywhere. A plan began to take shape in my mind. I couldn't remain here, that much was certain, but I found myself at a crossroads, unable to flee despite the weight of the knowledge I carried. A sense of duty settled over me, compelling me to uncover the truth behind this unsettling mystery. I moved swiftly, gathering essentials. A few changes of clothes, some cash I had tucked away, and basic toiletries. My gaze fell upon the laptop, a dilemma unfolding in my mind. I couldn't take it with me, yet leaving it felt equally perilous. With a decisive motion, I retrieved the hard drive, tucking it safely into my bag. In a flash of ingenuity, I swapped it with the drive from my old laptop, ensuring that to any prying eyes, it would appear as nothing more than an ordinary device. Just as I completed this careful ruse, a knock echoed through the stillness of the room, and my heart raced as a deep voice called out, "Mr. Thompson, we need to speak with you about a recent purchase you made." I chose silence, quietly slipping toward the fire escape outside my bedroom window. As I descended, the ominous sound of my front door being broken down echoed in the stillness. My feet met the cool pavement of the alley, and I took off, not knowing my destination but feeling an urgent need to flee. The shouts behind me pushed me forward, and I ran for what felt like hours, taking random turns, doubling back. Anything to shake off the shadow that pursued me. Finally, feeling utterly spent and breathless, I slipped into a 24-hour diner. The waitress cast me a curious glance as I settled into a booth, yet she remained silent. With trembling hands, I ordered a coffee, then reached for my phone. I was in desperate need of assistance, but whom could I rely on? Suddenly, a thought crossed my mind. Ava, my ex-girlfriend. She was an investigative journalist for the local paper, and if anyone could help me unravel this mystery and ensure the information reached the right ears, it was her. I dialed her number, hoping against hope that she would answer. Despite the weight of the night pressing down on me and the stillness of the late hour, Ethan's voice came through, thick with sleep. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" she murmured. "Ava, I'm sorry, but I need your help," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm in trouble, big trouble, and I think I've uncovered something huge." A pause lingered in the air. "Are you drunk?" she asked, skepticism lacing her words. "I wish I was," I confessed, Can you meet me, please? I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I sensed the urgency in my tone had reached her. Okay, she finally said. Where are you? I shared the address of the diner and hung up, the weight of anticipation settling over me as I waited. Unable to shake the unsettling feeling that enveloped the night, I felt the weight of unseen eyes upon me, each newcomer causing me to flinch, every passing car cloaked in suspicion. Ava arrived about 20 minutes later, her brow furrowed with concern and a hint of annoyance. All right, Ethan, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. What's going on? I took a deep breath and shared my tale. As I spoke, I watched her expression shift from skepticism to shock, and finally to a grim determination I recognized from our days together. The look she wore when she was onto a big story. Show me, she urged when I finished. I pulled out my laptop, ready to reveal the truth as she booted it up. Her eyes widened with each file I opened, revealing the vastness of my discovery. Ethan, she said slowly, do you realize what this is? This isn't just some criminal organization. This is evidence of corruption at the highest levels. Politicians, police chiefs, judges, they're all implicated in these files. My mouth went dry as the weight of her words settled in. What do we do? I asked. Ava paused, deep in thought. We can't go to the police, not yet. We need to verify this information, find corroborating evidence, and above all, we need to keep you safe. She pulled out her laptop and began typing with urgency. I'm emailing my editor. We're going to need resources for this protection. As she worked, I glanced out the window and my heart nearly stopped. The dark sedan from earlier was pulling into the parking lot. Ava, I hissed, we need to go now. She looked up, saw my expression, and nodded. We quickly packed our things and headed for the back exit. As we slipped out into the night, I heard shouts behind us. They'd found us. My car's this way, Ava said, grabbing my hand. We ran through alleyways and side streets, the shadows closing in around us and the stillness of the night. The echo of pursuit lingered just out of sight. We finally arrived at her car, an old but steadfast Honda Civic. As we pulled away from the parking spot, I caught a glimpse of two men lurking around the corner, their faces contorted with rage. Where are we going? I inquired, my voice barely above a whisper as Ava expertly maneuvered through the desolate streets. I have a cabin upstate, she answered, her gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead. It's off the grid. We'll be safe there while we figure this out. As the city lights dimmed behind us and the highway unfurled before us, a strange blend of fear and exhilaration coursed through me, a reminder of how quickly everything had changed in just 24 hours. Life had taken a turn into the unknown, and I found myself a fugitive, pursued by shadowy forces that eluded my understanding. Yet, I was not alone in this dark journey. For the first time since it all began, a flicker of hope ignited within me. Whatever I had stumbled into, whatever perils awaited, one truth resonated deep within. The truth would emerge, it simply had to. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, I made a silent vow to see this through, no matter the cost. That laptop, purchased on a whim, had unwittingly drawn me into a world of intrigue and uncertainty. Joshua and intrigue enveloped me, yet within that darkness, I found a sense of purpose. I was resolute in my determination to see it through to the end. The first shadow I glimpsed might have been a mere trick of the light. The second, perhaps my imagination playing tricks. But when the whispers began to echo from behind the walls, a chilling certainty settled in my bones. I was not alone in this sprawling, haunted mansion. Whatever lingered in the shadows with me was far from human. I had taken the job as an overnight caretaker at Blackwood Estate out of sheer desperation, fresh out of college and burdened with a mountain of uncertainty. With student debt weighing heavily and job prospects dim, the advertisement felt like a beacon of hope. A historic mansion was in search of a live-in caretaker, offering night shifts and excellent pay. It seemed almost too perfect, and as I was beginning to discover, perhaps it was. The interview had an air of peculiarity from the very beginning. The owner, a reclusive old woman named Mrs. Fairchild, scrutinized me through her thick glasses, her eyes unnaturally magnified. "You're not afraid of the dark, are you, dear?" she inquired, her voice a raspy whisper. I chuckled nervously, assuring her, "No, ma'am, not at all." She nodded, a look of satisfaction crossing her face. "Good. You'll need a strong constitution for this job. The nights can be long at Raven Crest." I should have paid more attention to her warning, but the allure of a paycheck and a roof over my head drowned out my doubts. My first night at Raven Crest unfolded quietly, though it carried an unsettling air. The mansion loomed large, a sprawling Victorian structure with more rooms than I could ever hope to count. My responsibilities were straightforward: patrol the halls, ensure all doors and windows were locked, and report any disturbances. Simple enough, I thought. On the third night, a peculiar atmosphere enveloped the place. As I made my usual rounds, a soft, melodic humming drifted from one of the unused bedrooms. I froze, my flashlight beam quivering as it illuminated the closed door. Suddenly, the humming ceased. "Hello!" I called out, my voice reverberating through the empty hallway. Was someone there? Silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. Just as I began to convince myself it was all a figment of my imagination, a giggle, high-pitched and childlike, pierced the stillness, sending shivers racing down my spine. I approached the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. It was ice cold to the touch. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. The room was empty, moonlight streaming through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. But there, in the center of the room, was a small handprint in the dust on the floor. A child's handprint. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding. This had to be some kind of prank, right? Maybe the day staff were hazing the new girl. But as the nights wore on, the incidents became harder to explain away. Objects would move when I wasn't looking. Doors I had sworn I locked stood wide open on my next pass. And always, there was that unsettling feeling of being watched. It all came to a head on my seventh night. I found myself in the mansion's vast library, reshelving some books that had mysteriously ended up on the floor. As I reached up to place a heavy tome on the top shelf, I felt something brush against my leg. I looked down, expecting to see a mouse or perhaps one of the mansion's many stray cats. Instead, I saw a small, pale hand reaching out from behind a bookcase. I stumbled, books tumbled to the floor around me, and the hand withdrew, leaving behind a lingering echo of a childlike giggle that danced through the air, now paired with the soft patter of small feet scampering away. "This isn't funny," I called out, my voice trembling with unease. "Whoever's doing this, show yourself." But the only reply was the gentle creaking of the old house, settling into its own secrets. I fled from the library, abandoning my duties and my job, driven by a desperate need to escape. Yet, as I reached the main foyer, something halted me in my tracks. A figure loomed at the top of the grand staircase. It was Mrs. Fairchild on the staircase, but not as I had seen her before. She appeared younger somehow, her hair a deep black instead of gray, her posture straight and regal. "Leaving so soon, my dear?" she asked, her voice echoing strangely in the cavernous space. "What's going on here?" I demanded, striving to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What is this place?" She smiled, and in that moment, she seemed to transcend humanity. "Raven Crest has always attracted the young and the desperate. It feeds on them, you see, their fear, their vitality." As she spoke, more figures began to emerge. Children appeared in old-fashioned clothes, their eyes hollow and dark. A man in a butler's uniform stood nearby, a gaping wound in his chest. A woman in a maid's outfit had her neck bent at an impossible angle. "What are you?" I whispered, backing towards the door. Mrs. Fairchild's smile widened, revealing too many teeth. "We are the caretakers of Raven Crest, and now, my dear, so are you." I turned and ran, yanking at the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Behind me, I could hear them approaching, their whispers growing louder. In a moment of sheer desperation, I seized a heavy candlestick from the nearby table and brought it crashing against the nearest window. The glass shattered, and without a second thought, I dove through the jagged opening, ignoring the sting of cuts and scrapes as I tumbled onto the overgrown lawn. I fled into the night, not daring to glance back, my heart racing until I reached the main road. There, a passing trucker took pity on my plight and offered me a ride into town. Once there, I went to the police and recounted my tale. They listened patiently, but then informed me, with a hint of disbelief, that Blackwood Estate had burned down in 1954, leaving nothing but echoes of its past. In the heart of an empty, overgrown lot, I found myself grappling with disbelief. The following day, I returned to the mansion, resolute in my quest to prove my sanity. Yet, as the police had described, there lay only a vast expanse of weeds, interspersed with the charred remnants of a fire long extinguished. No mansion, no Fairchild, no specters to haunt my thoughts. As I stood there, attempting to reconcile the reality before me with the vivid experiences I had endured, a chill crept down my spine. Amidst the tall grass, a glimmer of something metallic caught my eye, beckoning me closer with a sense of trepidation. My heart raced as I beheld the candlestick, the very one I had used to shatter the window. There it lay, a tangible piece of evidence from a place that was said to be nothing more than a figment of imagination. Fear gripped me, and I dared not reach for it as I drove away. In a fleeting glance through my rearview mirror, I could have sworn I caught sight of the mansion, standing tall and foreboding against the twilight sky. In an upstairs window, a pale face seemed to watch my departure. I never returned to Raven Crest. I left the state and changed my name, seeking to escape the shadows of that night. Despite my efforts to leave that night behind, there are moments, late in the quiet hours, when I still hear the whispers. Shadows flicker at the edges of my sight, and I find myself pondering whether I truly escaped Raven Crest or if it lingers, patiently awaiting its next caretaker. The job offer resurfaces now and then, tucked away in small local papers or hidden on obscure websites. A historic mansion seeking a live-in caretaker for night shifts, offering excellent pay. Somewhere out there, another soul, perhaps just as desperate, is likely reading it, believing it to be the solution to their troubles. In the stillness of the night, I feel a weight upon my heart, a warning that begs to be shared. I wish to tell them, to urge them to flee from Raven Crest, a place haunted by its insatiable spirits. Yet, who would heed the words of one who speaks of a mansion lost to flames long ago? So, I remain quiet, an observer in the shadows, vigilant and alert. Each evening, I secure my doors and windows, leaving a light aglow, for I have come to understand that darkness is not merely an absence of light. If one gazes too long into the depths of the shadows, they may find the shadows gazing back. My time at Raven Crest has forever altered my perception of the night. I no longer perceive the world as I once did. Every old building holds its secrets, and every shadow may conceal something otherworldly. I have become a collector of peculiar tales, a seeker of the unexplained, for I have come to understand that there is more to our existence than what most eyes can behold. And sometimes, in the stillness of the night, when the wind howls and the house creaks, I find myself yearning for the long corridors of Raven Crest, for the whispers that linger in the walls and the distant laughter of ghostly children. For as unsettling as it was, it also held a certain thrill that beckoned me closer. There was a time when everything felt real, but now, shadows linger in my mind. I recall Mrs. Fairchild's smile, unnaturally wide and sharp, and the chilling caress of spectral hands. It serves as a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be truly closed. I keep my distance and caution others, Yet a part of me understands that Raven Crest will one day beckon me again. When that moment arrives, I wonder if I will possess the strength to resist its haunting allure. For once you have glimpsed the other side, the ordinary world never quite feels the same as we approach the town. The moment I caught sight of the townspeople's eyes, an unsettling feeling washed over me. It was clear we had entered a realm far more sinister than a mere pit stop. Their gazes held a vacancy, a hollow emptiness that sent chills creeping down my spine. While my wife sought directions, a growing sense of dread settled in. We had not found refuge but had unwittingly wandered into a snare. What had begun as a routine road trip, Ava and I driving cross-country to her parents' place for Thanksgiving, had taken a turn into the unknown. We had made this journey countless times before, yet this year felt different, foreboding in ways we could not yet comprehend. We decided to take a scenic route, hoping to catch glimpses of the charming small towns that grace the American landscape. Little did we know, that choice would lead us into a rather unsettling predicament. Somewhere in the Midwest, surrounded by endless fields of corn and wheat, our car began to emit an ominous clanking noise. Though I'm no mechanic, it was clear that something was amiss. We pressed on for a few more miles, but soon the engine gave out completely, leaving us stranded on a desolate stretch of highway as the sun dipped below the horizon. Surely, there must be a town nearby. Ava glanced at her phone, her brow furrowing. "I'm not getting any signal out here," she said. I nodded, attempting to mask the unease that was creeping in. A few miles back, we had passed a sign. Willowbrook, I believe it read. Couldn't be too far now. We gathered what we could carry and began our trek. The November air was crisp, and a light fog started to roll in, shrouding the path ahead. As we walked, an unsettling silence enveloped us. No crickets chirped, no small creatures rustled in the grass. Only the sound of our footsteps and the occasional whisper of the wind. After what felt like hours, we finally spotted lights in the distance, a wave of relief washing over you as we hurried along. A strange sensation washed over us. Willowbrook appeared from the mist, like a mirage, revealing a small cluster of buildings that seemed frozen in time, reminiscent of the 1950s. The town was unsettlingly quiet for an early evening. No cars traversed the streets, and no souls wandered about. Most storefronts lay in darkness, yet we noticed a diner with its lights still aglow. "Thank God," Ava murmured. "Maybe they have a phone we can use." But as we drew closer to the diner, an unsettling feeling lingered in the air, and the neon open sign flickered ominously. The light flickered erratically, casting shadows that danced along the walls. Through the windows, I caught sight of a few patrons, sitting unnaturally still in their booths. The bell above the door jangled as we entered, the sound echoing impossibly loud in the quiet diner. Every head turned to look at us, moving in perfect unison. Their eyes, there was something unsettling about them, glassy and unfocused, reminiscent of a taxidermied animal. Hi," Ava said, her voice wavering slightly. "Our car broke down a few miles back. Could we use your phone to call a tow truck?" For a long moment, there was silence. One moved or spoke, and then, as if someone had flipped a switch, they all smiled. It wasn't a warm or welcoming smile. It was mechanical, rehearsed, as if they were trying to remember how smiling worked. A waitress approached us, her movements stiff and jerky. "Welcome to Willowbrook," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "We don't get many visitors here." I could see why, I muttered under my breath. Ava elbowed me in the ribs. "About that phone," Ava began, but the waitress continued as if she hadn't heard. "You must be tired from your... the journey unfolds. Why don't you take a moment to sit down and enjoy some pie? Our cherry pie is quite renowned in these parts." Before we could voice our hesitations, she had already guided us into a cozy booth. The other patrons continued to gaze at us, their smiles lingering in an unsettling manner. "Look," I said, striving to keep the tremor from my voice. We truly appreciate your hospitality, but we really must be on our way. If we could just use your phone. But the waitress interrupted, her smile unwavering. There's no need to rush off. You're our guests, and guests in Willowbrook always. Stay for pie. As if on cue, a man emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 plates of cherry pie. He set them down in front of us with robotic precision. Ava and I exchanged glances. Something was very, very wrong here. It's getting late, Ava said, her voice tight with forced cheerfulness. We should really find a place to stay for the night. Is there a motel in town? The waitress's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Oh, we have plenty of room for you here. Willowbrook always has room for new residents. The way she said residents sent a chill down my spine. A chill crept down my spine as I stood up abruptly, grasping Ava's hand. Thanks for the offer, but we'll be going now, I said. As we moved toward the door, the other patrons rose in unison, forming a wall between us and the exit. Their faces remained fixed in those eerie smiles. Now, don't be rude, the waitress said, her voice stripped of any pretense of friendliness. You haven't even tried the pie. I glanced around frantically for another way out. The kitchen. If we could just get through there, perhaps we could find a back door. Run, I whispered to Ava, then louder, look, a UFO. It was a desperate ploy, but it worked for just a second. Every head in the diner turned to look out the window. That moment was all we needed. We bolted for the kitchen, shoving past the startled cook. Behind us, I could hear the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as our pursuers gave chase. The kitchen was a maze of stainless steel and hanging utensils. We dodged around prep tables and vats of bubbling liquid that I was pretty sure wasn't soup. At the back, just as I'd hoped, was a door. Alexandered exit. I slammed into it with my shoulder, and we burst out into the cool night air. But our relief was short-lived. The entire town seemed to have awakened. Figures were emerging from every building, all moving towards us with that same unnatural gait. This way, Ava hissed, pulling me towards a narrow alley between 2 buildings. We ran, our feet pounding on the pavement, the sound of pursuit growing louder behind us. The alley opened up onto another street, but it was no use. They were everywhere, closing in from all sides. Their faces were all the same. Now, we stood there, blank and emotionless, with those terrifyingly vacant eyes staring back at us. What do they want? Ava gasped as we pressed ourselves against the wall. In response, the crowd parted, revealing a figure stepping forward. It was an old man, his back hunched and leaning heavily on a cane. Unlike the others, his eyes were sharp and alert. "Welcome, travelers," he said, his voice surprisingly strong. "We've been waiting for you. What is this place?" I demanded. "What do you want from us?" The old man chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Willowbrook has always been here." As the shadows deepened, a figure emerged, beckoning with a voice that seemed to echo through the night. "We await lost souls like yourselves," he intoned, his words weaving a spell of intrigue. "New blood, you see, new minds to join our community." I glanced around, noticing an unsettling transformation among the townsfolk. Their skin began to shimmer with an eerie translucence, features blurring into something unrecognizable. With each heartbeat, they appeared less human, more like phantoms drifting through the twilight. Ava's whisper broke the silence, her voice trembling with dawning horror. "You're not really people, are you?" The old man's smile widened, stretching impossibly across his face. "We were once," he replied, his tone dripping with a chilling nostalgia. "But Willowbrook changed us, improved us. And now, my dear, it is your turn." He raised his cane, and the crowd shifted. A wave of anticipation washing over them surged forward. I felt cold hands grabbing at me, pulling me down. Ava's scream was cut short as she was engulfed by the mass of not quite human bodies. I fought, clawing and kicking, but there were too many. As I felt my consciousness slipping away, I saw the old man standing over me, his form shimmering and changing. "Welcome home," he said, and then everything went black. I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, I was lying in a bed in what looked like a quaint country inn. Ava was next to me, still unconscious. For a moment, I thought it had all been a terrible dream. Then, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror across the room. My eyes, they were different, glassy, unfocused, like those of a taxidermy animal. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't cooperate. Instead, it curved into a wide, unnatural smile. Through the window, I could see the sun rising over Willowbrook. It looked like a perfect small town now, straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that Ava and I would be greeting the next, lost travelers who stumbled into our little slice of Americana. Welcome to Willowbrook, where everyone smiles and no one ever leaves. The moment my motorcycle vanished around the corner, a sense of dread washed over me. I knew I had made a grave mistake. The unease in my stomach was not merely about losing my cherished possession, but rather the unsettling awareness that I had drawn a predator into my life, and now he was aware of my every move. It all began innocently enough. I had made the choice to sell my beloved Indian Scout, a decision that would soon unravel into something far more sinister. More out of financial necessity than desire, the bike had been my companion through countless road trips and late-night rides. However, mounting bills and a recent layoff meant sacrifices had to be made. I posted an ad online, complete with photos and a detailed description. Within hours, I received a message from a guy named David. He seemed genuine, asking intelligent questions about the bike's history and maintenance. We arranged to meet the next day for him to take a look. When David arrived, he looked the part of a seasoned rider. He wore a leather jacket and well-worn boots, a knowledgeable glint in his eye as he circled the bike. We chatted easily about motorcycles and the open road. For a moment, I even felt a pang of regret about selling mine. "Mind if I take her for a spin?" David asked, his hand resting on the handlebar. "Just around the block to get a feel for her." I hesitated. It wasn't an unusual request when buying a bike, but something in my gut twinged. I pushed the feeling aside, chalking it up to nerves. "Sure," I said, handing over the keys. "Just be careful." With a wide grin, David swung his leg over the seat, and the engine roared to life. He offered me a quick salute before pulling away from the curb. I stood there, watching as he rounded the corner at the end of my street. The sound of the engine faded, and I waited for it to grow loud again as he completed the block, but the sound never returned. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last, and the sick feeling in my stomach grew. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the police, when I noticed a notification. A new message. Message from David: "Thanks for the bike, sucker. Better lock your doors tonight." My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a theft, it was a threat. I rushed inside, my hands shaking as I locked every door and window. My mind raced. How could I have been so foolish? I'd invited this man into my home, shown him where I lived, and now he had my bike, seemingly with plans to return for more. The police were sympathetic but not particularly helpful. They took my statement, but without the bike's GPS tracker, which I had carelessly. As I contemplated selling, I felt a disconnection from everything around me. They didn't have much to offer in terms of reassurance, merely suggesting I stay with a friend for a few days. But leaving was not an option. This was my home, and I refused to let a thief drive me away. As darkness enveloped the world outside, every sound transformed into something more sinister. The creaking of the house settling echoed like footsteps in the stillness, while the rustling leaves outside my window seemed to carry whispered threats. Sleep eluded me, a distant memory in the face of the night's eerie embrace that it was a time, perhaps around 2 a.m. I heard the low rumble of a motorcycle engine, its sound growing louder as it approached. My heart pounded as I peered through the blinds. There, at the end of my driveway, was my Harley, and a figure sat astride it, his face obscured by a helmet. I assumed it was David. He sat there for what felt like hours, the bike idling, leaving me to wonder if he was taunting me, planning his next move. I debated calling the police again, but a fear gripped me. What might happen in the time it took them to arrive? Finally, the figure revved the engine and sped off into the night. I released a breath I didn't realize I was holding, hadn't realized I'd been holding, but my relief was short-lived. This I knew was far from over. The next day, I was a wreck. Exhaustion and fear had left me jumpy and irritable. I called in sick to my new job, unable to focus on anything but the threat hanging over me. As I made yet another pot of coffee, my phone buzzed. Another message from David. Miss me, don't worry, I'll be back maybe. Tonight, maybe not. Sweet dreams. That was it. I couldn't live like this, jumping at shadows and waiting for the other shoe to drop. I needed to take action. I spent the day preparing, digging out the old baseball bat from my college days and keeping it close. I set up makeshift alarms on all the doors and windows, empty cans balanced precariously, ready to clatter to the ground at the slightest disturbance. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like I was doing something. As darkness fell, I positioned myself in the living room, lights off, bat in hand. The hours crept by, each car passing on the street making my heart race. Just as my vigilance began to wane, I heard it. Theus, the sound of my bike approached. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm. This time, there was no idle threat lurking in the driveway. The engine fell silent, and I could hear footsteps on my front porch. The doorknob rattled once, twice, and then there was an eerie stillness. I gripped the bat tighter, my palms slick with sweat. For what felt like an eternity, nothing stirred. Had he given up? The answer came suddenly, shattering the silence. Glass breaking as he made his way through the window. Instinct took over as a dark figure emerged from the jagged opening. I swung the bat with all my strength, and there was a satisfying thunk followed by a cry of pain from the intruder. As I stumbled, I swung again, catching him in the ribs. He went down hard, cursing and gasping for breath. Fumbling for the lights, bat still raised defensively in the sudden brightness, I finally got my first clear look at my tormentor. It wasn't David. This man was older, his face weathered and scarred. He glared up at me, a mixture of pain and rage in his eyes. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. He spat blood onto my carpet. "Doesn't matter. Your buddy David owed me," he said. "And he said I could have the bike. To settle his debt, I thought I would explore what else might occupy my thoughts." My mind spun as I realized David, the supposed buyer, had orchestrated this entire situation. He had used me to clear his own debts, fully aware of the kind of person he was sending my way. Suddenly, the wail of sirens sliced through the stillness of the night. A neighbor, disturbed by the chaos, had alerted the police. As the patrol car arrived outside, a wave of relief washed over me. It felt like the end. The aftermath blurred into a haze of police statements and insurance claims, revealing that the man who had broken in was not who I had expected. With a long history of similar crimes, he was destined for a lengthy return to prison. A few days later, my bike was found, left behind in a parking lot across town. As I gazed at it, the joy and excitement it once brought me had vanished, replaced by the shadows of fear and violation that lingered in my mind. This time, I sold it for good, passing it on to a dealer. The money was invested in a security system for my home, cameras, motion sensors, the whole array. Some might label it paranoia, but to me, it was a small price to pay for a sense of peace amidst the darkness. Weeks drifted by, and gradually, life began to settle into a familiar rhythm. Yet, within me, a subtle transformation had taken place. I found myself treading more carefully, my instincts sharpened, and a veil of suspicion cloaked my interactions with strangers. The trust one once freely offered had been rattled to its very foundation. One evening, as I stepped out of work, I noticed a figure leaning against a motorcycle in the dim light of the parking lot. For a fleeting moment, my heart quickened, old fears bubbling to the surface. But as I approached, the figure came into focus. A coworker, simply admiring his new ride. "Hey," he called out, "want to go for a ride?" I paused, caught in the web of my thoughts. The person I used to be would have leaped at the opportunity, but now uncertainty lingered in the air, and I hesitated. Another time, I found myself forcing a smile as I hurried to my car. As I drove home, an unsettling feeling of loss enveloped me. Not just for my bike, but for the person I once was. The person who saw the best in others, who embraced adventure without a hint of fear. That night, I sat on my porch, gazing at the quiet street. A motorcycle roared by, its sound once thrilling, now sending a shiver down my spine. I pondered whether I would ever feel that thrill again or if the fear would always linger just beneath the surface. And as I watched the bike fade into the distance, I couldn't help but wonder as I watched the world fade into the distance. A decision took root within me. I realized I couldn't allow a single unsettling experience to define my journey. I refused to let fear have the final say. The following day, I inquired about my coworker's bike, and when he graciously offered to take me for a ride once more, I inhaled deeply and accepted. As we glided along the open road, the wind caressed my face and the engine's growl resonated beneath me. I rediscovered a sensation that had eluded me for far too long: freedom. Though the fear lingered, a soft murmur in the recesses of my mind, it no longer held dominion over me. I had confronted my deepest anxieties and emerged on the other side. On one side, I found myself transformed, yet not shattered. As the miles unfurled before me, I came to understand that often, the only path beyond fear is to confront it. The open road beckoned once more, and this time, I felt prepared to respond. The moment the first scream reverberated through the cave system, I realized our simple hiking trip had morphed into a struggle for survival. What awaited us in the shadows of those caverns would linger in our minds for all time, should we manage to escape. It was meant to be a delightful weekend escape with my friends, Ryan and Avery. Zoe and I had been planning this hiking trip for months. We were all experienced outdoor enthusiasts, yet none of us had ever ventured into the infamous Whispering Hollows caves. The local legends surrounding the cave system had always piqued our curiosity. Tales of mysterious disappearances and strange noises in the night. We had chuckled at them, dismissing them as mere campfire stories meant to frighten tourists. How wrong we were. The hike to the cave entrance was uneventful, filled with the familiar banter and excitement of friends embarking on an adventure. The weather just right, with warm sunshine enveloping us as we made our way through the thick forest canopy. The cool breeze whispered secrets of damp earth and ancient stone, guiding us toward the gaping entrance of the main cavern. "Well, this is it," Ryan said, his voice a blend of excitement and a hint of unease. "Whispering Hollows caves. Last chance to back out." Avery rolled her eyes, dismissing his words. "Don't tell me you're buying into those silly ghost stories." Ryan, perhaps a bit too eager to reassure, replied, "Of course not. I'm just saying it's not too late to hit that brewery in town instead." Meanwhile, Zoe was all ready. As she retrieved her headlamp, a sense of determination filled the air. There was no turning back now. We had journeyed too far to let fear take hold. I nodded, pushing aside the flicker of unease that stirred within me. We were well equipped, armed with maps, extra batteries, and first aid kits. Everything necessary for a safe spelunking adventure. What could possibly go wrong? The first hour spent in the caves was nothing short of awe-inspiring. Vast chambers unfolded before us, their walls shimmering with mineral deposits that danced in the glow of our headlamps. We moved forward with care, each step echoing softly in the stillness as we made our way through the narrow passages. We marveled at the bizarre rock formations, shaped by millennia of flowing water. It was at a fork in the passage that an unsettling feeling began to creep in. Our map indicated only one path, yet here lay two identical tunnels stretching into the darkness. "That's strange," I murmured, double-checking the map. "This split isn't marked anywhere." Ryan suggested, "Let's try both passages. Maybe the map's outdated. Cave systems can change over time." Avery nodded in agreement. "True." We debated for a few minutes, weighing our options, before finally deciding which way to go. The left tunnel appeared to slope gently upward, and we hoped it would eventually guide us back to the surface. As we ventured deeper, the air grew noticeably colder, our breaths escaping as invisible puffs. I found myself shivering despite the exertion of the hike. The walls of this tunnel felt different, smoother, almost polished in places. There was something else, too, a faint smell I couldn't quite place. "Does anyone else smell that?" Zoe asked, voicing my thoughts. We all paused, sniffing the air. It was a musty odor, but with an underlying sweetness that felt oddly unsettling. "Perhaps a strange fungus," Ryan remarked, though his tone lacked certainty. We continued deeper into the tunnel, which gradually opened into a vast chamber, the darkness swallowing the light from our headlamps. It was in this eerie expanse that we heard it, a scream, distant yet unmistakable, reverberating through the cave. We halted, exchanging wide-eyed glances filled with disbelief and fear. "What the hell was that?" Avery whispered. Maybe it was just the wind," Zoe suggested, her voice trembling. But we all sensed it wasn't merely the wind that had let out that scream. It had a human quality to it. "We should go back," Ryan suggested, already turning around. I was on the verge of agreeing when we heard it again, this time much closer. It wasn't a scream of fear or pain. It resonated like a battle cry. Before we could gather our thoughts, figures began to emerge from the shadows at the edges of the chamber. They moved with an eerie speed and grace, closing in on us from all sides. In the beam of my headlamp, I caught fleeting glimpses of pale, almost translucent skin and eyes that glimmered in the light like a cat's. "Run!" I shouted. Grabbing Zoe's arm, I pulled her towards the tunnel we had just traversed. We sprinted back, the sound of pursuit echoing ominously behind us. The once smooth walls of the tunnel now felt sinister, as if the very cave conspired against our escape. We skidded around a corner, only to find ourselves confronted by a dead end that hadn't existed before. "This is impossible," Avery gasped, recalling our earlier path. But there was no time to ponder the mystery. Our pursuers were drawing nearer. We pressed ourselves against the wall, desperately searching for any glimmer of hope as we navigated the escape route. I noticed a narrow crack in the rock face, almost hidden in the shadows. I called out, pointing, "We can squeeze through, one by one." We pressed ourselves into the crevice, the tight fit causing the rough stone to scrape against our skin as we inched forward. I was the last to enter, and just as I pulled my legs in, I felt something grasp my ankle. In a moment of panic, I kicked out blindly, hearing a hiss of pain as whatever had gripped me released its hold. I quickly scrambled deeper into the crack, emerging into another chamber, smaller and more confining than the last, with multiple tunnels branching off in different directions. Without discussing it, we picked one at random and ran, our footsteps echoing off the walls. After what felt like hours of frantic flight, we finally stopped to catch our breath. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but the oppressive silence that replaced it was almost worse. What were those things?" Zoe panted, her face pale in the glow of our headlamps. Nobody had an answer. We were lost, hunted in a cave system that seemed to defy the laws of nature and logic. Our supplies were dwindling, and with each passing moment, our chances of finding a way out grew slimmer. Huddled together, we weighed our next move when a low growl echoed through the tunnel, followed by the unsettling scrape of claws against stone, drawing nearer. "We need to move," Ryan whispered urgently. But as we turned to flee once more, we were met by pale figures blocking our escape. Their eyes gleamed in the darkness, humanoid yet unsettling, with elongated limbs and fingers ending in wicked claws. Their mouths were filled with needle-sharp teeth bared in feral grins. We found ourselves trapped. Just as I was certain this was the end, a new sound filled the cave, a high-pitched keening wail that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The creatures surrounding us recoiled, covering what passed for their ears. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded the chamber, and through my squinted eyes, I saw new figures entering the fray. They were tall, willowy beings that seemed to glow from within, and in their hands, they held weapons that appeared to be made of pure light. What followed was a battle unfolded before my eyes, unlike anything I had ever witnessed or could have conjured in my mind. The pale, feral creatures fought with a savage ferocity, yet they were no match for the glowing beings wielding their luminous weapons. In mere minutes, it was all over. One of the radiant figures approached us, and as it drew near, I could see its face, eerily beautiful, with features that seemed to shift and change with every glance. "You should not be here," it said, its voice resonating within my mind rather than through my ears. "This place is not for your kind." We stumbled upon this realm. I managed to reply, my voice barely a whisper. "Please," we stammered. "We just want to go home." The being regarded us silently for a moment, then nodded. "We will guide you to the surface, but you must never return, and you must never speak of what you've seen here." For days, we followed our luminous saviors through the twisting tunnels. The journey passed in a blur, and before I knew it, we were stumbling out into the sunlight, blinking and disoriented. When we turned back, the cave entrance was gone, replaced by a solid rock face, as if it had never existed. We never spoke about what happened in those depths and the stillness of the night. There are whispers of caves, dark and foreboding, where echoes of inhuman screams linger in the shadows of our dreams. Beneath our very feet, a war rages in a realm we were never meant to witness. The next time the idea of exploring those depths arises, I will gently suggest a visit to the brewery instead. Some mysteries, I've come to understand, are best left untouched. The underground will remain shrouded in enigma, and perhaps that is how it should be. As the first flicker of headlights pierces the darkness, one can only wonder what lies beneath and the rearview mirror. A wave of relief washed over me, but that feeling quickly turned to unease. As the lights grew larger and brighter, a chilling certainty settled in. Whoever was behind us was not here to help. They were hunting us. What had begun as a simple family road trip, my wife Ava, our two kids, Lily, age 8, and Oliver, age 6, had taken a dark turn. We had decided to take the scenic route to my parents' house for Thanksgiving, driving for hours while the kids grew restless in the back seat. Then I spotted a sign for a shortcut. Deer Run Trail, 30 miles shorter. To Cedarville, it proclaimed in faded letters. Ava had given me a skeptical look. "Are you sure about this, Joshua? It's getting dark, and we don't know the area." I brushed off her concerns. "It'll be fine. We'll save an hour at least. Plus, it'll be an adventure, right?" The kids, Lily and Oliver, cheered from the back seat, excited by the prospect of an adventure. If only I'd known what kind of adventure we were really in for. At first, the road seemed fine. A little rough, maybe with more twists and turns than I had anticipated. A straightforward journey, one that our SUV could easily manage. Yet, as we ventured deeper into the forest, the trees loomed closer on either side, and a sense of unease began to creep in. The road transformed from asphalt to gravel, eventually dwindling to little more than a dirt track. Our headlights pierced the encroaching darkness, revealing a path that seemed to grow wilder with each mile. "Joshua, I really think we should turn back," Ava said, her voice tight with concern. "This doesn't feel right." Just as I was about to concur, The engine emitted a sound that sent a chill through my veins, ice, a sputtering coughing noise that I recognized all too well as a sign of trouble. No, 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 I muttered, easing off the gas. But it was too late. The engine gave one final violent shudder and died, leaving us coasting to a stop in the middle of nowhere. For a moment, we sat in stunned silence, the sudden quiet broken only by the soft ping of the cooling engine. "Daddy," Oliver's small voice came from the back seat. "Why did we stop?" I turned to face my family, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's okay, buddy, the car is just having a little problem." Well, as I stepped out to check under the hood, a sense of foreboding washed over me. I wasn't a mechanic, but it was clear that we were in serious trouble. Stranded, I pulled out my phone, bracing myself for the inevitable. No signal, of course. Ava joined me outside, her face pale against the encroaching darkness. "What are we going to do, Joshua?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. "Okay," I said. "We have some food and water in the cooler, blankets in the trunk. We'll be fine for the night. In the morning, I'll—" As we made our way back to the main road in search of help, she nodded, though I could sense the fear lurking in her eyes. We both understood that morning felt like an eternity away. We did our utmost to make the children comfortable, transforming the back of the SUV into a makeshift bed. As they drifted off to sleep, Ava and I sat in the front, speaking in hushed tones about our options. It was then that we noticed the first flicker of light in the distance. A spark of hope ignited within me. Another car, someone who could assist us. But as the lights drew nearer, that hope began to twist into unease as the vehicle drew near. Its movements were erratic, alternating between bursts of speed and sudden slowdowns, its headlights casting eerie beams across the road as if in search of something elusive. "Joshua," Ava whispered, her grip tightening around my arm. "Something's not right." I nodded, feeling a dryness settle in my mouth. "Wake the kids," quietly. "We need to get out of the car." As Ava gently stirred Lily and Oliver from their slumber, I hurried to the trunk, retrieving our emergency backpack. I grabbed the flashlight, a first aid kit, some snacks, and a bottle of water. It wasn't much, but it would have to suffice. Just as we reached the shelter of the tree line, the other vehicle loomed closer as the scene unfolded. A battered pickup truck emerged, its engine growling ominously as it drew closer to our stranded SUV. From our concealed vantage point, we observed two men disembark. Even in the faint light, their rugged appearances suggested they were not the sort one would wish to encounter. "Check the car," one of them commanded, his voice sharp and commanding. They can't have gone far. My heart raced, each beat echoing in my ears, a sound I feared might betray us. Oliver let out a soft whimper, and I quickly covered his mouth, my thoughts a desperate plea for silence as the men rummaged through our vehicle, their frustrated shouts rising in intensity as the sounds grew louder with each passing moment. A sense of urgency settled over me. We couldn't linger here. It was only a matter of time before they began searching the woods. "We need to move," I whispered to Ava, urging her deeper into the forest. She nodded, her expression a blend of fear and determination. Taking Lily's hand, she led the way into the enveloping darkness. I followed closely behind with Oliver, who kept glancing over his shoulder. We stumbled through the underbrush, striving to remain as quiet as possible while putting distance between ourselves and the road. The forest was alive with the sounds of the night. The soft hoot of an owl echoed through the trees, and the stillness of the night, the rustle of small animals in the leaf litter sent shivers down our spines, each noise making us jump, convinced that our pursuers were right behind us. After what felt like hours, though it was likely only 20 minutes, we found ourselves in a small clearing. The children were weary, their faces streaked with tears. "Mommy, I'm scared," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. Ava pulled her close, trying to offer comfort. "I know, sweetie, but we're going to be okay. Daddy and I won't let anything happen to you." I wished I could share her confidence, but deep down, I was gripped by fear. We were lost in an unfamiliar forest, surrounded by shadows and uncertainty and the stillness of the night. A sense of dread enveloped me as I found myself pursued by men whose intentions were too dark to ponder. With two young children to protect, the weight of the situation felt like a nightmare come to life. Suddenly, a branch snapped nearby, and we all froze, caught in a moment of fear. I signaled to Ava, urging her to take the children and seek refuge behind a fallen log, while I crouched behind a sturdy tree, my heart racing. The beam of a flashlight pierced the darkness, swinging erratically as heavy footsteps drew closer. I held my breath, hoping against hope that the children would remain silent. "I know you're out here," a gruff voice called out. Echoing through the stillness, the voice called out, urging us to make it easy on ourselves and come into the open, claiming they just wanted to talk. I didn't buy that for a moment. These men had chased us into the forest under the cover of night, and their intentions felt anything but friendly. The footsteps grew louder, and soon I could make out the figure of one man, his face partially lit by the beam of his flashlight. He was large, with a scraggly beard and eyes that flicked back and forth, searching for any sign of us. It was clear he was determined to find us. It was only a matter of time. I knew I had to act. Taking a deep breath, I picked up a rock and hurled it as far as I could in the opposite direction and the stillness of the forest. A sudden clatter echoed against a tree, the sound piercing the serene night. The man's head turned sharply towards the disturbance, a low mutter escaping his lips as he moved away from us. Once he vanished from sight, I hurried to Ava and the children. "We have to keep moving," I whispered urgently, sensing the danger closing in. Ava's face was pale, yet her resolve shone through as she nodded. We set off once more, our steps as quiet as shadows, ever watchful for any sign of those who hunted us. With each step, my mind raced, weaving together a plan amidst the encroaching darkness. We couldn't sustain this for much longer. The children were weary, and truthfully, so were Ava and I. We were in dire need of assistance, and soon. That's when I noticed it. A faint glow in the distance, too steady to be a mere flashlight. A house? A ranger station? Whatever it was, it represented our best chance. "Look," I whispered, pointing towards the light. "We're going to head that way, okay?" With renewed energy fueled by hope, we moved faster. The light grew brighter, and soon, the shape of a small cabin came into view. Just as we reached the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood, I heard shouts behind us. They picked up our trail. I yelled, abandoning all attempts at stealth, and we sprinted across the open ground, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind us. Lily stumbled, and I scooped her up without breaking stride. We reached the cabin door just as our pursuers broke from the tree line. Ava pounded on the door, screaming for help. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then the door flew open, revealing an older man holding a shotgun. "Get in," he barked, his eyes widening as he took in our terrified faces and the men behind us as we hurried inside. The urgency of our situation was clear. The man swiftly closed the door, securing it just as our pursuers arrived at the porch. "Who are you?" he asked, his grip firm on the shotgun. Between breaths, we shared our tale, watching as his expression shifted to one of concern. "Damn Brennan boys," he muttered, a hint of frustration in his voice. He then approached an old-fashioned phone on the wall, the first sign of communication we had encountered in what felt like ages, and started dialing. "This is Jack Sullivan out on Riverside Drive," he said into the receiver. "Got a family here being chased by the Brennan gang. Send everyone you've got." As we waited for the police to arrive, huddled in the safety of Jack's cabin, I held my family close. We were safe, at least for now, but I knew that the memory of this night would linger with us for a long time. Our shortcut had transformed into the longest night of our lives, a nightmare that could have unfolded much differently if not for a stroke of luck as I stood there, The distant wail of sirens echoed through the night, and a silent vow formed in my heart. No more shortcuts, no more reckless decisions. From this moment on, the safety of my family would take precedence. The flashing lights of the police cars illuminated the clearing, and for the first time since our car had broken down, a sense of relief washed over me. We had survived, we were together, and in that realization, I found that this was the greatest adventure of all.